CEO of the Center for Public Justice. We're a Christian civic education and public policy organization based in Washington, D.C. And welcome to Opportunity for Transformation, the Role of Faith in Juvenile Probation Reform. The Center for Public Justice is hosting this convening today to educate as well as learn from national and local Christian clergy and faith-based nonprofit leaders, Christian academics, and Christian professionals in the justice field about juvenile probation, the need for reform, and the role of families and community-based institutions, including faith-based organizations, in ensuring a juvenile probation system that is more effective and equitable. We also really want to recognize that this conversation is happening in a specific context at a specific moment in our nation's history, where we recognize that many of our minds are already focused on dealing with the challenges associated with last week's attack at the US Capitol, with displays of both white supremacy and Christian nationalism, and also COVID-19's ongoing impact on our communities. And so we're really grateful for you making the time to be part of this conversation today. We know that you're taking time out of serving your community by being here with us. And we also want to acknowledge that there is incredible work that many organizations and congregations who are represented already do to serve their communities, and in particular, young people who are impacted by the justice system. So today, I would really welcome each of us to take the posture that we are taking as hosts, one of mutuality and hope. Our goal today is to learn from each other, including all of our expertise and knowledge in our conversation. So our objectives for our convening today are to educate and learn from the Christian leaders, clergy, and public officials who are here about juvenile probation, including the similarities and distinctions from the adult system. This is going to include learning about current juvenile probation outcomes, both in the short and long term, and racial disparities within the juvenile probation system. We're also going to talk about a vision for juvenile justice reform and why a model for probation reform centered on family and community-based organizations, including faith-based organizations, can and will work. And we want to identify pathways for engagement on this issue, both as individuals and as the organizations we represent, as well as for the community that's formed today. So we have a great day ahead scheduled for us. We're sad that we can't be in person, but it has created the opportunity for folks around the country to be with us today. If you would be willing to take a minute to drop into the chat feature your name, your organization, and where you're located today. So not necessarily where your Zoom background is, but where you are today, so we can get to know each other. And lastly, just two housekeeping notes as we're getting started today. If you would also take a minute to make sure that your full name and your organizational affiliation are appearing in your Zoom screen. There's a rename button that you can use on your own picture. And if you can also make sure to keep yourself on mute today, with the exception of our afternoon breakout sessions, where we'll have plenty of time to talk with one another. We're going to handle all of the questions throughout the morning using the chat feature. And it will be open during the entire convening. So do feel free to drop in questions for our presenters as they arise, and they'll get asked. And also, Deborah from our team is here with us today, helping things to run smoothly. If you have a question about the technology or concern about the technology, you can message Deborah in the chat as well. You should also have received the agenda for today and the bio sheet in email, but Deborah's going to drop those in the chat as well, just in case, so you can link to them. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce Yasmin Arrington, who's serving as our MC and who has helped plan and design our time together today. So Yasmin Arrington was born and raised in Washington, D.C. She is a 2015 graduate from Elon University with a Bachelor in Arts in Strategic Communications and History. Yasmin earned her Master of Divinity degree from the Howard University School of Divinity in May 2018. And Yasmin was a 2020 Center for Public Justice Sacred Sector Fellow, where she had the opportunity to serve as an advocacy intern with Prison Fellowship. In 2010, while Yasmin was a junior in high school, she founded the nonprofit Scholarships, an organization that provides college scholarships, mentoring, and a support network to children of incarcerated parents, inspiring them to complete their college education. To date, Scholarships has awarded over $250,000 in college scholarships to 61 scholars, with 22 graduates to date. So welcome, Yasmin.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for that lovely introduction, and good morning, everyone. It is really a pleasure to see each and every one of you and so many faces that I know very well. It is an honor to be alongside you here today at this convening, where we will be learning and discussing the role or roles of the faith-based community in juvenile probation reform. Each of your churches and organizations were hand-selected to attend today's convening because of your backgrounds and work in social justice work and in the community. At this time, I am honored to introduce you to two phenomenal individuals who we will hear from next, who will educate us on juvenile probation and set the stage for today's convening. Mr. Stephen Bishop and Ms. Opal West. Mr. Stephen Bishop is a senior associate with the Annie E. Casey Foundation. Stephen has a Master's of Science in Administration of Justice and has worked in juvenile justice for more than 2 decades, starting as a juvenile probation officer and supervisor in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and then working for more than a decade at Pennsylvania Juvenile Court Judges Commission. Steve currently manages the foundation's efforts to transform juvenile probation nationally, which includes oversight for grant making, site-based technical assistance, research studies, and publications related to juvenile probation. Ms. Opal West is a program associate with the Annie E. Casey Foundation, dedicated to transforming juvenile probation nationally. West began her career as a juvenile probation and parole officer in Louisiana. Working for state government there, she led statewide expansion efforts for the JDAI approach to building a better and more equitable youth justice system, and served on a task force to develop standards of care for state-run secure facilities and local detention centers. I would like, once again, Stephanie mentioned this, but I want to reiterate, note that at some point during the presentation, you will see a poll question pop up on your screen, and we're asking that you respond to that poll question and hit the submit button, either with your mouse or your keypad. And also, once again, just a reminder, we will be using the chat box for questions. So as you're listening to the presentation, if you have a question, please put it in the chat box, and we will do our best to get to your question during the Q&A. All right, without further ado, here is Mr. Stephen Bishop and Ms. Opal West.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Yasmin, for the introduction and for all of your efforts in helping design and facilitate today's meeting. And thanks, Stephanie and Katie, for holding this convening. Really looking forward to today's conversation. This is really an exciting group of folks. The panel this afternoon is phenomenal. And from looking at the attendee list, just a phenomenal group of folks who are participating today. So really happy to engage in this conversation with you. We have a full agenda, so we're going to kind of just jump right in. But I will say that as we go throughout, as Yasmin suggested, we're going to have a poll question, a couple other questions where we're going to prompt some responses from folks. And we also want to encourage you to ask questions throughout. So feel free to use the chat function to post any questions. We'll try to respond to those probably about midway through our presentation. We'll also take a break, because recognizing that some of this material is going to be pretty new to folks, and it may feel like a lot of information being thrown at you. So we'll take some pauses as well to be able to answer specific questions. But with that being said, I'm going to jump in and start with a video. So technology being what it is, Bear with me as I switch over to that. Every year, thousands of youth are put on juvenile probation, more than half for low-level offenses, like shoplifting or acting out in school. Kids are being hauled into court for behavior that used to simply get them referred to their parents or principal, and this happens disproportionately to kids of color. Being on probation comes with curfews, restrictions on where you can go, orders on who you can hang out with, and rules that are so convoluted and hard for anyone to follow without a slip-up, especially for teens whose brains are still developing. Once a kid messes up, like missing curfew a few times, he's violated probation. This often results in a young person removed from their families, locked up in a juvenile facility, their education is disrupted, their job is lost. They often end up worse off than if the system hadn't gotten involved in the first place. Kids should still be held accountable, but in ways that help them grow up and mature. Kids need support, not court dates and criminal records for normal teenage behavior. We know what works with young people. There are effective ways to promote personal growth and positive behavior change in youth. The Annie E. Casey Foundation has developed a vision for transforming juvenile probation based on human development and intervention strategies that have been shown to reduce delinquency, and from real-world pilots in cities and counties across the country. It's all about setting young people up for success as adults. We can start by diverting young people with nonviolent, low-level charges from juvenile court altogether and towards community organizations, human service agencies, and their own families. Probation officers could then focus their time on youth who do pose a significant risk for serious offending. Second, we should emphasize incentives, not sanctions. For generations, juvenile probation has been built around punishment, but research makes clear this approach is totally backwards. Incentives as small as movie tickets can motivate young people to do positive things, like succeed in school and remain drug-free. Third, we must commit to racial ethnic equity. While only 40% of the country's youth population are youth of color, they are overrepresented on probation caseloads and diverted less frequently than their white peers. And youth of color represent 68% of youth held in residential custody for a technical violation. That's being locked up for breaking rules, not breaking the law. Finally, we should build young people's skills, decision-making, and positive connections. Those are the real game changers. We know what to do. Now it's time to get probation right. Okay, so that gives a little bit of an overview of obviously our probation work. I'm going to attempt to share my screen again just to get us into the PowerPoint presentation for today.
From the Annie E. Casey Foundation, I'm Lisa Hamilton, and this is Casey Cast. Today, we're
Okay, so hopefully that video gave you a quick little overview. Obviously, we're going to dive much deeper into some of the key aspects of the juvenile probation work. As Yasmin noted in the introduction, both Opal and I started our careers and worked many years in juvenile probation. So in many ways, we still identify in that way and very passionate about this work. And very passionate about where we see the field going and where we really think it needs to go to be able to really get the best outcomes that we need for young people in this country. So why transform juvenile probation? So I'm kind of a history person. I like the History Channel, so I always like to kind of understand the roots of things. And so I'll try to share a little bit with that with all of you. So the person that you see at the top is who is widely considered to be the father of probation in this country. That's John Augustus. John Augustus was a bootmaker in Boston in the 1800s. Somewhere around 1841 is when John Augustus kind of backed into the work of probation. As I said, John Augustus was a bootmaker who really just wandered into court and noticed that people in the community were being jailed for things like public drunkenness, vagrancy, loitering, kind of small public order offenses. But the only real response of our criminal justice system at that time was jail. And John Augustus just thought that that seemed wrongheaded. So John Augustus basically volunteered his services to the court and convinced the judge to release people into his care, to let them apprentice with him in his bootmaking shop, and help get them on the right path. I share that story about John Augustus, and I share it often when I do training with probation officers all across the country, to underscore a couple of things about the history of probation. One, that probation at its inception was a true innovation. Again, there was no alternative to jail until this came along. The other piece to really understand is that John Augustus, as I described, was focused on providing support, assistance, and opportunity for people. It wasn't focused on surveillance, compliance, law enforcement. John Augustus didn't have court orders or electronic monitoring and other surveillance equipment that's typical today. It was really focused upon providing assistance and opportunities for people. And most importantly, John Augustus was a community member. This innovation that we now know of did not come from within the walls of the court. It did not come from who worked for the court. It came from a community member who sought to impart a different solution. About 50 years later in Chicago, we saw the inception of the first juvenile court, which took it even a step further, where we sought to really distinguish and understand the differences between how we respond to criminal behavior that's committed by young people versus by adults. That's really kind of what brought me to the field. So the picture at the bottom is me. Well, it's not really me. It's how I saw myself in my head, probably the night before I started my career as a juvenile probation officer. This is how I envision myself, as being a counselor, a mentor, someone who could work with young people and get them on the right path. Because based on my own experience, I'm from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, small city. This is the state capital of Pennsylvania. But like a lot of urban centers across this country, plagued with a lot of big city issues. When I started high school as a freshman at Harrisburg High School, there were 600 people in my class. I graduated with a class of 250. So I know all too well the many barriers that kids of color in this country face, and all the different challenges in, moving into a successful adulthood. So that's what really brought me to the work. Opal, I'm sure, has a similar story. And when I talk to probation officers all across the country, I hear similar stories. People who came to the work wanting to provide support, assistance, be mentors and counselors to young people, but often get ensnared in a much bigger system that's focused in a different way. So unfortunately, the reality is that probation largely looks like the picture that you see at the top right. One that very much is about law enforcement, about surveillance, about compliance. And what I would suggest is that though the people in those uniforms may have the best intentions, that does not look like help coming to knock on your door. That does not look like a helper who's coming to visit a child at their school or at their work. And so we really want to think about what is our vision, what is our mission for probation, and how we try to center things and get back to its roots.
Thanks, Steve. We do have an interesting question in the chat that I thought you might be able to answer since you're the history buff, but I can add one fun fact about John Augustus. John Augustus has the most impressive success rate out of any intervention in history. There was only about 10 people that failed his apprenticeship program, and he had thousands that came through. So that just proves, I think, how successful a community-based intervention can be whenever you're working with someone who's maybe facing these challenges. Steve, do you have an answer to this question? Was he a church person? And if so, did Christian faith inform his work in getting probation started?
That's a great question. I'm not sure. I have never seen that aspect chronicled about John Augustus. That's a great question. I have to read a little bit more.
All right, cool. All right, so continuing with our presentation, we wanted to lay some sort of some fundamental understanding of what we'll be talking about here, and just sort of get everybody on the same page as far as language in terms that you may be hearing throughout our presentation. And when most of you think about the juvenile justice system, you're probably thinking of a place. So like some sort of secure facility, maybe a prison, a kid's prison or a detention center. And because those places traumatize young people, many young people, and our most vulnerable youth population. And we know that those places disrupt young people who encounter those places. We wanted to lay the foundation on what we mean by some of these definitions. So a detention center, you may hear us talk about detention in some of our presentation. A detention center is a secure facility that's primarily and supposed to be used as a short-term place to hold a youth before they go to their court hearing to be adjudicated or to be found or disposed of in the court system. There's also a term called placement or confinement, and that's when a young person is pulled out of their home or out of their community and placed somewhere else. And it's usually a setting of like a youth prison, it's a foster or group home, and those places are very real. And you'll hear throughout our presentation about the role that probation can play in that sort of continuum of the system. But one thing that I would like to point out between detention and placement, or detention and youth facilities, most youth secure facilities, is that they're very, very similar. The environment is similar. The physical composition of those places is very similar. And you'll see that in these two pictures that we have on this slide. The next thing that we would talk about, and why we're here primarily today, is probation. So probation is when a youth is allowed to remain at home and in their community, but they are supervised by a person, a probation officer. And they also have court conditions that they need to meet for a certain designated period of time that's been determined by the court. But they are allowed to stay home, and those conditions that are usually placed on them need to be adhered to. And we will talk about some of those things and some conditions that come up within our presentation later on.
Okay, thanks, Opal. So we're going to start with the poll question, get everyone involved. And so I'm launching the poll. Hopefully everyone can see that. And the question is, what percentage of youth on probation in the United States have not been found guilty in juvenile court? I'll wait a few moments for folks to be able to respond. Again, the question is, what percentage of youth on probation in the US have not been found guilty in juvenile court? Okay, looks like we have a good number of answers coming in, and let me see how this shows. Okay, so the answer is actually yes, 46. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the data that we have. Let me see, having trouble sharing now for my screen is moving. Just a second, I'm going to go back into the PowerPoint. Hold me off. Did it bring that back up? Okay, so yeah, the correct answer is 46%. So you can see from this data here, and one of the major problems with probation is, quite frankly, its outsized role in the juvenile justice system. So a couple different data points I'll walk you through. On the chart on the right, you can see dispositions for youth adjudicated delinquent in U.S. courts. And essentially, adjudication is the same as a guilty verdict in adult court. And so you can see that for young people who are formally processed in the juvenile justice system in this country, overwhelming majority are placed on probation. I tend to think of probation sometimes in this country, juvenile probation, like on the Oprah Winfrey show, with like, you get a car, you get a car. It's kind of like, you get probation, you get probation. We tend to use probation for everything, from a first response for kids who their first time in trouble, all the way up to a response for young people who may be at risk of out-of-home placement. But it's pretty widely used. But what's even more jarring is if you look at the last bullet on the left, and you can see that almost about 121,000 young people in this country have been placed on probation and have probation officers and those are informal cases. Status offenses, which are basically offenses that are only a crime because it's a person under 18, like curfew, underage drinking, using tobacco. And so these informal type of probation is really highly used, and almost as much as formal probation. And so that's just a data point that I find jarring to me. And even when I share it with practitioners in the field, tends to really be striking. The fact that we have almost as many young people in this country on probation caseloads who've not been found guilty as young people who have been. And so probation has a really big footprint in this country, and I would contend is overly used. Some of the other problems with probation and what really led us to this work around probation transformation, it perpetuates racial disparities. Talked about that in the video, how youth of color are grossly overrepresented, both on probation caseloads, underrepresented in terms of being given opportunities to be diverted from the system. And as you get deeper into the system, you see that the disparities actually grow. So when you get to the deepest end of the system, as you see in this chart, for young people who have violated conditions of their probation, or for all young people in the country who are confined as a result of violating their probation, almost 2/3 of those are youth of color. So we really see the disparities grow the deeper you get into the system. So in that way, we know that probation is often a gateway to out-of-home placement. Current US data shows that almost about 1 in 5 youth in confinement are there again for breaking probation rules, not actually breaking the law. And I can say, as someone who, as a PK myself, as a former probation officer, I certainly believe in youth having rules. I have lots of rules in my own house, but it's hard for me to imagine what rules my children could break that I would, want to send them away, miles away from home. And so it's really important to think about the threshold that we have for removing young people from their home. Most importantly is that probation, as is currently structured in this country, really lags behind what we know about youth development. That basic structure of probation that Opal described a few minutes ago, that a judge puts a kid on probation, gives them a long list of conditions, a long list, oftentimes in some jurisdictions, we understand as many as 30 different conditions and rules that they must follow and comply with. They're assigned a probation officer and basically have to comply with these rules. And when they don't, they can receive any number of sanctions up to and including being removed from their home. That basic structure, we now know, really lags behind and really is in conflict with what we know about adolescent development and what helps young people thrive and grow. So what is probation transformation? So just about 3 years ago now, the Casey Foundation, we released this report entitled Transforming Juvenile Probation, A Vision for Getting It Right. And obviously we had some big aspirations with this, but a couple of key things I want to get into in terms of why we thought it was important to actually craft a vision for the entire field. In most industries, having a mission and a vision statement seems pretty standard. Unfortunately, in juvenile justice and in juvenile probation, that just doesn't exist. There is no commonly articulated vision at the national level by the Federal Office of Juvenile Justice, Delinquency and Prevention. Many states, even within their statutes and codes, may make mention of purpose for the juvenile justice system, but very few really hit on a key purpose for juvenile probation. And what I find in working all across the country is that within states, oftentimes the vision and the mission of probation differs from county to county. And even in my own personal experience, it oftentimes differs from cubicle to cubicle. I was the type of probation officer that I had 3 pages of violations on young people before I thought about bringing them back to court. Whereas the person right next door to me maybe had their own kind of 3 strikes and you're out rule. And so what that means is that for young people and families in this country, the experience of probation is very random. And it really is largely dependent on who's your probation officer, who's your judge, and things of that nature. And that really sets kids up for failure, particularly our most vulnerable youth who already have a number of challenges and barriers that they have to overcome. So we thought it was important to try to lay out what a vision for probation in this country should be, to really be able to identify what probation should be, why we use probation, what's the right population, and most importantly, the how. How do we achieve the goals that we set forth? We outlined in our publication 2 key pillars for probation. The first based on the data that I just showed, is that we should be diverting far more young people from the system altogether. We know from now decades of research and literature that actual formal system involvement increases risk for young people. So formal system involvement, no matter how well-intentioned it is actually a predictor of future offending. So we should do everything possible to keep young people from the formal system when possible. And this is where really we're going to get into the conversation about everyone here at this meeting and the role of the faith-based community and diverting young people from the system altogether. On the whole, in this country, about 6% of delinquency offenses each year are violent offenses. Opal and I see this in our work all over the country, where probation roles are filled with young people who commit low-level misdemeanor offenses or have been assessed as low risk. So just a tremendous amount of room and opportunity to divert young people from the system. And then on the other side of that, for young people who do actually pose a significant risk for serious reoffending, who have potentially caused harm to their community and will benefit from some form of formal intervention, we really need to modernize the system of probation. We really need practice to catch up with the research and to design a 21st century type of probation that is responsive to the young people who we're concerned about most. So starting with diversion, a couple key things there. One, diverting young people can do much more good than it can do a whole lot of good. We know that most young people will age out of any delinquent type of behaviors with or without formal system involvement. I'll back up one step further. Our challenge isn't so much to prevent delinquency, but as adults in our society, how do we respond? Because we know that what's normative for young people is to break rules, push boundaries, to challenge authority. Adolescence is a time of individuating. And I would even suggest, as the father of two teenagers myself, if you know a young person who doesn't push boundaries, challenge authority, and break some rules, those are the young people we should probably be even more concerned about, because it's part of the natural growth process for young people to individuate in those ways. But most young people will age out of those risky, concerning behaviors with or without system involvement. And so we should do our best to stay out of their way and not cause harm. As I mentioned, we know that formal system involvement for a number of reasons actually causes harm to young people, including exacerbating disparities. We know that youth of color in this country receive far less opportunity to be diverted. In fact, the most recent national data shows us that a white youth is more likely to be diverted for a person offense than a youth of color is for a public order offense. So we have some real disparities that we have to grapple with in our country. And the other point is that it's a waste of system resources. We now know empirically through decades of research that the typical type of supervision that lower risk youth receive on probation, maybe being seen once a month, is effectively no treatment at all. It has no actual impact on a young person's behavior. And so we waste a number of system resources by over intervening with young people.
So you may be wondering why, thanks, Steve. Wondering who's doing this, who's putting this into action. So there's three key places that we work with that have really taken this to the next step and put in policies that ensure that we are protecting youth from over-involvement in the system and deeper entrenchment. The first place is Lucas County. They have a policy in place and have been committed to diverting all youth with misdemeanor offenses and first-time nonviolent felonies. They are sent to what they have established as an assessment center that will sit down with the young person and their family and assess what's going on with them. What supports do they need within the community? How can the community step in, and how can they support the family and the young person and sort of redirect what's going on? And they have solidly put a policy in place that really dictates that this is what our jurisdiction will do and that what we will uphold to. The next place that's really, really impressive is Los Angeles County. Los Angeles County has really taken it to the next level, in that their diversion program and their decision-making around diversion really rests in a community-based organization. And also there's dedicated funding that supports this community-based organization that takes on all diversion cases. In Los Angeles County, there are also, they take it to a next level in ways that other places don't. They are taking all felony cases other than there's certain offenses that they will not take according to the law. But they take felony cases, high-level felony cases, and even repeat offenders. So it's really impressive what they're doing there. And then another impressive thing that we've seen recently, last month, come out of Los Angeles County is a directive from their District Attorney Gascon from Los Angeles County, who has really solidly said to his staff and to the public that this is what we will do with young people. We need to ensure that our first priority is to keep young people in their community and their families, to give them support systems rather than to deepen them into the system. And to also, and he's created parameters on how he will ensure that that is happening for young people. The other place that's really innovative is Santa Cruz, California, that has really said we're not going to use technical violation. We're not going to use technical violations on our diversion cases. If a child does not follow through with whatever the stipulations of the diversion program is or the diversion agreement, they are not going to send them back to court to put in any penalties. They're just sort of washing their hands and saying, oh, well, you know, we tried, and we're going to send them on their way and ask them not to do this again. And that is something that the Casey Foundation believes in is best practice, and that we think is best for young people. Because if you are diverting a young person, but yet they're not following through on sort of all of these determinations and compliance, to send them back to court is really counterintuitive, and it sets them back again. And again, that sort of perpetuates the deeper involvement into the system. So these are three key places within our country that are really doing innovative stuff and have really taken this philosophy around diversion and taken it to like next level and put it into practice. You can go to the next slide, Steve.
Okay. And before we switch to probation, I don't know, I can't see it on my end there. I don't know if there's any questions in the chat at this point before we move to the probation piece.
Yeah, so we wanted to pause here and take a few questions. There are questions in the chat. Our first question is, are tethers ever used in juvenile probation? I'm not quite sure.
I missed that word.
Tethers? I'm not quite sure what's meant by the question. Todd, if you'd like to clarify in the chat, please do. The next one is, do you have any information regarding how lack of relationship with a biological father or committed male family members impact juvenile probation?
I'll take a stab at that. I think there are probably some folks I know that are part of this meeting, particularly on the panel this afternoon, that may be able to speak to that more specifically, that population. I will say that globally, in terms of understanding youth development, we know that certain protective factors need to be in place for young people to thrive. And we know what some of those markers are. So certainly having a caring, supportive adult in their life, whether it be a biological parent or otherwise, and Opal later on is going to talk a little bit more about how we're looking at and defining family engagement, to really think about a more expansive circle. We know that young people need to be able to build skills. They need opportunities to, for vocational and career development, things of that nature. So we do know that young people need positive adults and mentors in their lives. But I'll defer to others in terms of, whether it needs to be biological parents, but certainly we understand that that's a key component for young people to be successful.
So we got clarification on the word tethers. What he's talking about and referring to is electronic monitoring. And so he has expressed in the chat, I don't know if you can see it, Steve, but it's all the way to the bottom. He is not in favor of that. And so going back to the question the question was, are tethers ever used in juvenile probation? I'll take a stab at this first, Steve, and then you can jump in.
Sure.
Yes, incredibly. Yes, it is probably one of the most widely used interventions that probation departments use. And I think there's a couple of reasons why. I think that's because, one, because they have not quite figured out what other interventions they can create and how to support that. So what we believe is, really building up community partnerships and support so that electronic monitoring and other devices like that are not relied upon to sort of monitor the young person. The other reason is because, and Steve touched on this earlier, many probation departments across the country are still tied to this sort of mentality of compliance and surveillance. And so, it's just sort of keeping a hawk's eye on young people. And they just have not really sort of figured out what are some other innovative ways that we can, sort of keep young people under our watch, but yet not in such a way that we are watching their every single move. And then I think he had a follow-up to that. Go ahead, Steve.
No, I was just going to add, and I'm going to move on to the next slide, that, in general, this is where we talk about the allocation of resources, and particularly how systems should be leveraging partnerships with community-based organizations. Because I would contend it's a much better investment in mentors for young people than electronic devices to monitor them.
So you want to keep going? You can go to the next. And if you could put this in the chat, your answer. Our question to the audience is, confinement is the best option for youth at high risk? And if you, that would be great.
No, and I can't see the chat. Just let me know when you're ready.
Not confinement is not the best option for even the kids at higher risk. Deploying probation and community resources is really what helps young people. And we also know the detriments of confinement on young people and what that does to them and the impact it has. The research shows that even one day in detention can disrupt a young person's life, connections to community, connections to school, connections to their family. And you could read more about that, but even one day in detention can hinder a young person from finishing high school, increase their likelihood to recidivate and be deeper entrenched into the system. And also there's other mental health implications that can happen whenever we confine a young person.
So essentially, to try to paint a picture for what we're suggesting for probation and understanding all that Opal talked about as well, which is we know we get better outcomes with young people in communities than we do when they're in facilities. And we know clearly now from the research that the most effective programs are family-centered. They help young people build skills and competencies, or restorative justice programs and things of that nature. So it's really about, when we talk about the higher risk youth, the youth who do actually pose some risk to public safety, and the youth that we're most concerned about is how do we make sure that we're really leveraging resources to give them our best. So I think about even the time that I was a probation officer, and the reality is the first day I stepped into the job and I had a caseload of 40 some kids, most of those young people didn't really need me. Most of them were on for lower level offenses, had a number of strengths and support in place, and really did not need my intervention. But I had stipulations, and as a job, I had to follow the court orders and check up on these kids. But what fell through the gaps was the couple handful of kids that I have who I really did lose sleep at night over. Young people who I saw as they were maturing and aging were moving from being involved in extracurricular activities, being tied to organizations, their churches, and other things that were prominent in their life at a younger age, and being pulled into the streets, possibly gang involvement. and other types of negative activities. And what I found is oftentimes I didn't have the support, the resources necessary to be able to work successfully with those young people. We're really talking about reinventing probation in a way to really attend to those specific needs, working with the young people who concern us most, having really small caseloads so that probation officers can be focused on forming caring relationships with them and their families, and helping them build their network and their relationships, so that they have the types of supports in place long after their time on probation. That we do family-centered case planning. So instead of these standard court orders with long laundry list of conditions, that we really center case planning with young people and families on what is going to meet the needs of that specific family. As I talked about in the video, using incentives. We know very clearly that young people are much more motivated by incentives and positive reinforcement than the threat of punishment. But we really need to figure out how to capitalize and utilize that. And most importantly, building partnerships with families and community organizations, to make sure all young people have a mentor. Oftentimes, the idea of mentorship has a negative connotation when you're talking about urban communities and communities of color. But if you go into some other areas, mentorship is a very positive thing. So we need to kind of shift resources, because every young person should have role models and have constructive activities and safe recreational spaces. So that's really going to require a different type of investment from our justice system into faith-based community, to the community at large, to be able to build the supports that young people and families need. So next question I ask you to join in on, next factor myth is probation conditions such as curfews make communities safer. And invite everyone again to just in the chat, list out your responses to that. Factor myth, probation conditions such as curfews make communities safer. And that also is a myth. And so here's the reality with that. Having sanctions and all of these stipulations actually do not suppress new offending. There's been no research that shows that. What we believe at the Casey Foundation is public safety, community safety actually results from engagement and employment. Having young people meaningfully involved, learning to be have some level of civic engagement, and being connected to constructive organizations and activities in their community. Again, because as Opal said, we know what all the potential harms of confinement are. For that reason, the Casey Foundation and several other national prominent organizations, such as the National Council of Juvenile Family Court Judges, the Council State Government's Justice Center, to name a few, have called for the elimination of the threat of confinement as a sanction for technical violations of probation. To really put it plain and simple, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. The potential harms and risks to young people being in confinement simply do not outweigh them breaking rules of probation in their community.
We have some really good questions in the chat. And now the last three that came in are really, I think, centered around this, which is family engagement and what is the role of family engagement in probation. The Casey Foundation believes that family is important, that community is important. We have to have those in place to support the young people when they come into the system and become court involved. And so we've identified 4 key pieces to family engagement that we think can really change not only the outcome for the young person that's experiencing probation, but also a way to really sort of recenter how the system is viewing families and young people, but also how they do things and how they operate. And so the first thing is to the definition of family. Many probation departments and systems only identify family as biological. So that would be only the young person's, very close, intimate family, and that's it. What we propose is that should be expanded, and we're calling it a youth circle of care. And so that can be anyone that the youth feels they are connected to, that they feel like that person can contribute to their growth. And it doesn't have to be biological at all. So that could be a person of faith that they know. It can be a store, corner store owner, if they feel like they are close to that person and that person can really help them and grow in their maturity and guide them in their experience. So we encourage systems to really expand how they view family and how they identify the young person's circle of care. We also believe that it's important for the young person to have a very large voice in who that circle of care is and the identification of that. And so, for instance, there's a lot of places that have expanded to include, other people outside of the immediate family and even extended family, no blood relation at all. The next would be to support guidance and advocacy for families, starting family programs such as family navigators and family councils. Family councils, and we have a couple of places across the country that are starting this, but it's family members that have young people who have been involved in the system that come together to help guide systems to understand the perspective of the families that are involved in the system, that have a say and can play a part in the change that happens in that probation department or in that system. And so they really guide them on policy development, on program development for young people, on policies, just sort of everything that they can, that the system will bring them into, and really getting their voice and their perspective on things. Family Navigators is a program that's in Lucas County, and it's really, and I believe Tracy Perryman is with us today, who helps with that. But Family Navigators is, it helps parents or family members who are going through this experience during probation or court involvement, and really just sort of being a support system to them. So, what can we help you with? What aspects are you maybe not understanding that we can guide you through? How can we best support you through this entire continuum and experience that you're going through? Family Voice and Retaining Family Connections, which is the family engaged case planning. So many, almost all probation departments, whenever a young person comes on probation, there's a plan that's developed with that young person to understand and to develop goals for them, to really understand what are they trying to achieve, what are their interests, what supports they need. And so what we are saying with family engaged case planning is to take that to the next level, and really start to partner with families and partner with the young person to really identify how we can support them. What do they need? How do we get innovative about this and really explore, like, what are some new opportunities that we can give the young person, and just really starting to work hand in hand with families. And then family-centered staff culture, which is really about changing how we view families and changing what their role is and changing how we view their role in the whole probation experience. So really seeing families as a strength and an asset for the young person rather than a deficit or some sort of blockage to them being successful and whatever they want in life. So it's really starting to view families as a key part of what we are doing and the young person's road to success. And that includes many probation departments are having training on that. We have a national partner that does that, Justice for Families, that does training across the country and really helps departments to really view families as assets.
So just in closing, a couple things. So where we've been investing, as we've laid out, a couple different ways. One with pilot sites. We've been working with Lucas County, Ohio, which is Toledo, and Pierce County, Washington, which is Tacoma, for about 5 or 6 years on this path. And as you can see in this slide, they've looked to reinvent probation in a number of different ways, through like the misdemeanor services, expanding diversion. Opportunity-based probation in Pierce County is a new case management model by which they heavily use incentives. They surveyed young people and families to find out what would be meaningful and motivate them to meet their probation goals. And so they developed a grid where They put those incentives and positive reinforcers up front in the case management model. And interestingly enough, when they survey young people to find out what would be motivating incentives for them, the response they got most from young people was being able to get like gift cards for meals and small gift cards to help with groceries. So what overwhelmingly came out from young people was the desire to basically help with basic household needs like groceries and things of that nature, but finding ways to incentivize young people for success. And also, as you can see in both sites, really developing, building out their muscle in terms of positive youth development, really engaging with different community organizations that can really provide a wraparound supports for young people, both help meet their clinical needs and treatment needs, but also to help them with all the things that we all want for our children: safe recreational spaces, the ability to thrive and think creatively about what you want to do with your life, and things of that nature. We're continuing to invest in that way at Casey. Over the last year and a half or so, we've taken on, as you can see, more than a dozen new sites all over the country that are engaging us in different levels on this work. Some of these are at a very local level. Some of these are statewide engagements, like in the state of Ohio, where we have several jurisdictions. And so we're really excited and happy to see that juvenile courts across the country are taking up this challenge, are seeing that the current court system as it's structured is not being effective and is not successful, and really understand the importance of really working with partners, that probation can't do it alone and shouldn't want to do it alone. The work of helping our nation's youth to thrive and survive is really something that we need to partner more collaboratively with the community on. I'll stop there because I know that we're at time. We had a short video at the end that we wanted to show folks. So I'll just confer with Stephanie. Maybe there's a different point in the agenda with some downtime, and we'll show that, because I know that we're at time now for our presentation. I'm not sure how many questions we still have in there, so we may have to figure out, I guess, maybe a way to handle some of those as well.
Thank you so much, Stephen Opal, for educating us on the origins of probation, sharing with us statistics around probation, and some jurisdictions' creative approaches to alternative sentencing, and some ways that community organizations can foster youth success. What we will do, thank you all so much for your questions. We had just a few more questions from Michelle Banks and Pastor Nathaniel Thomas. What we will do, we will collect the questions, and we will make sure to get the answers to you. But we really want to, next, we have an amazing, dynamic young man that we would like to introduce you to. He is resilient and energetic, and he has a great sense of humor. His name is Mr. Makai McCullum. Makai is a sophomore at Ballou Senior High School. He has firsthand experience with both juvenile probation and the restorative justice program in Washington, D.C., both of which he has successfully completed. So welcome, Makai.
How you doing, Ms. Yasmin? How are y'all doing today?
Good. It's so good to see you. How are you?
I'm fine.
Good. Okay, so we're gonna jump right in. Can you tell us your age, where you grew up, what grade you're in, your favorite subject, and what you like to do for fun?
My name is Makai McCullum. I'm from Southeast DC. I go to Ballou High School. And things I like to do for fun, I like to play video games. I like to mess with my little brother, and I like to sleep,
Oh yes, don't we all love our sleep? It's so nice to meet you, Makai, and we just want to thank you and recognize you for being willing to share your story. We know that you're in virtual classes, and so continuing with the Zoom is the Zoom life, but you're doing it, and we're grateful to have you here and for you to share your experiences. Makai, you've had experience with expulsion from school, detention, and juvenile probation. Please share with us how you felt the first time that you were detained, which when I say detained, I mean taken in handcuffs by the police and taken down for processing, and how that made you feel.
The first time I got detained, I was scared. I felt lonely once I once I was detained and they took me to the juvenile processing center in DC. I felt lonely. I felt angry, envy, because any type of bad, bad response to it. I was in my mind, I was just all over the place because I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what I was locked up for, so I was just all over the place and mentally.
Hmm. And can you share just a little bit more about that experience? I know that you had, in previous conversations, you mentioned that you were held in a room for several hours, and you didn't know whether you were going to jail or not. Like,
Yes, they put me in a holding cell, and I was scared because I didn't know what was going on. It was dirty, I ain't never I didn't never been in this type of environment before, It was a toilet right there. I didn't want to use the bathroom. I couldn't see out the windows, but they could see us. I couldn't see, so I can say it was surreal my first time. It was, and I had to wait 3 hours until I can get my fingerprints, and they can, all my everything, the pictures and everything. So I had to wait for that, and then they put me back in the holding cell for 3 more hours, and I was angry. I'm yelling for my grandmother. It was
mhm. And how old were you, Makai? Were you about 14 or so?
the first time I got locked up. I was 13 years old.
Mm, wow. How difficult is it when you are on probation, or as some call it, on the box? What are things throughout the probation process that you think worked well and helped you? And what are some things you think didn't work well or could be improved?
The things that worked well for me was during that time I had anger problems, and I was going through stuff, so the programs that they put in place for me, I think they really helped me out, like therapy and restorative justice. It was, a lot of programs that help me, think of different ways I can cope when I get mad rather than lashing out, than trying to fight somebody, yelling, cursing. They taught me different ways that you know, I can cope with me being mad inside the school, so I don't have to, get suspended, detention, etc. And the
Hmm.
bad, I'm not saying bad, but the cons of probation, the cons, sometimes when you have a probation officer and you live where I live at, knowing that you have family issues, family struggles and stuff, and still having to travel 3-4 miles across the city just to see a probation officer for 10-15 minutes, when most of the time he's not even in there, have to report to another probation officer. So I was angry sometimes, it was being on a box, having to sometimes put my ankle out the shower thingy, when I had to
Hmm.
take a shower, sleeping ways that I didn't really want to sleep because I had to charge my ankle monitor, you know, being in school, doing your work, and then the whole class just hear your ankle monitor say bzzz, that's embarrassing, But at the time, I didn't feel this way because, I was younger, even though I'm still young, but my mentality was different. So, I really thought that all that was cool, all, doing this, doing that, keep getting locked up, back on the box, been on house arrest. I thought that was cool until, you know, the cons that I just told y'all, you know, you can't do anything. You basically, you know, they got you locked in. I felt like a slave personally. So that is what drove me to, you know, tell me in my head, like, you know, I just want to get off this. I want freedom, you know.
Wow. And Makai, can you also share with us, like, I remember that you mentioned that one probation officer you didn't really have that great of a relationship with, but another probation officer you really did like, and you could tell that he had your best intentions at heart and he wanted to help you.
Yeah, you know, my first probation officer, I kind of took him for advantage. I didn't really, you know, he really had my best interests in heart, telling me, you know, stop hanging with certain people. He used to catch me outside 1 o'clock, not 1 o'clock, you know, 11 o'clock. I remember he caught me at the bus stop, hanging with my friends, you know, yelled at me, you know, get in the car, I didn't like none of that because, you know, I didn't have a male role model in my life to tell me, you know, to be strict on me, like, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do this. I didn't like structure. So it was, you know, either way, I'm trying to get out the situation. But once I grew and once I, you know, got to know him, it was more of he had the best interest in heart, you know, always looking out for me because I was always the youngest in Bodge. You know, Bodge is somewhere where, you know, they keep, you know, going after school, you have to go there and then they drop you off, but you do your homework and you know, it just keep you out the streets, I guess. And I was in there for like, I can say close to probably a year and some change. But you know, that kept me out of a lot of trouble too. And you know, he just kept me. I now that I realize he always kept me with activities, so I wouldn't, you know, end up doing the negative stuff. You know, so even though I still, you know, did because I was, you know, being a juvenile and, you know, doing what I was doing at the time, I was still being, you know, defined. But he really helped out. If he wasn't like, you know, taking them extra steps, you know, I probably would have had more charges, you know. And
Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in during the first half of our program this morning. We hope that you learned something new and feel motivated to perhaps bring this information back to your church, back to your organization, department, and or ministry. At this time, we are going to take a break. Originally, we were going to stop at 12:15 and take a 15-minute, we were going to take a 15-minute break, but I'm asking that we can take a 12-minute break. So if you can meet back here in 12 minutes, feel free to get up and stretch, take a bio break, grab a late breakfast or a late breakfast or early lunch. Feel free to bring it back. Please return because we have a phenomenal panel lined up for you of former probation officers, a gentleman who is a mentor through Torch, which is an arm or a subcategory of the Kairos program, and a woman who is with Healing Communities, a Reverend Doctor. We've got a phenomenal lined up for you. So 13-minute break. We'll see you back soon. Thank you so much.
Hi, Deborah.
Hi, Stephanie.
Hey, Deborah, this is Katie.
Hi. Do we have all the panelists on the call?
Let's see. I see Dr. Struthers, Delmas, we saw Dr. Perryman. To our panelists,
Yeah.
if you could just turn on your video. Hi, Dr. Struthers.
How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good.
Love your background. I wish I was there.
Great.
Too.
Nice to see you.
Okay.
Hi, Anna and Dr. Perryman.
Hi, how are you?
Doing well. How are you both doing today?
Doing well, thank you.
Doing well, thank you.
This
Wonderful.
was wonderful so far.
Yeah, great.
Thank you. Thank you. Great. So we have just a few minutes. With us is Deborah Haid, who is our tech person extraordinaire. So she's just very briefly going to give you a lay of the land for our session today. Go ahead, Deborah.
Yes. So just a quick summary of what will happen next is once the break is over, Yasmin will introduce Katie, and then Katie will introduce you guys. And while she is kind of introducing you, I will spotlight your videos, which means that all the attendees will see you on the screen starting then until the panel is over. And at the end of the panel, there will be a Q&A, and Katie will read through the questions, and you will still be on the screen, and then it will just be an opportunity to answer the questions together. But yeah, I think that's all the technical stuff that you need to know.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in to reiterate that feel free. I know you have the prepared questions that I've sent you, but if you want to chime in or interact with another's question or what they've said, feel free. We want to try to make this as in-person feeling as we can. So feel free to interact with one another as well. Should be joined by Delmas and Seema in just a moment.
Okay.
Deborah, I just reached out to Seema, so I'll let you know.
Okay. Because I think Delmas Wood is in the participants list. So
If you would like to take a break or go off screen, please feel free to. We'll get back at 12:30.
Katie, I see.
Hi, Delmas.
Oh yeah. I think you're muted right now.
Yeah, hi.
Hi there. How are you doing today?
Doing good, doing good. I was not able to get out of my class early, so but at least I was able to arrive. I
Good,
caught
good.
I caught the end of that young man's interview. It was very, very interesting, very good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Well, we're glad to hear you, to see you. Delmas, this is Deborah Haid, who's on our team. She's just very briefly going to tell you what to expect in terms of technology, but it's pretty straightforward.
Well, it better be very straightforward for me.
So yeah, just a very quick summary. Once the break is over, Yasmin is going to introduce Katie, and then Katie will introduce you guys, all the panelists. And as soon as she starts introducing you, I will spotlight your video, which means all of the attendees will see your video on their screen. And from there on, you will be on the screen. The panel will continue, and then towards the end of the panel, Katie will host the Q&A session with you still being on the screen, and that just will be an opportunity for you guys to answer the questions that have been asked in the chat.
Okay, so I really don't have to do anything. That'll be done for me.
Yeah, not really. You just,
That's the way I like it, Deborah.
great. You just need to know that you'll be on the screen, and people will be able to see you. So
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
That's fine. I'll try to be appropriate.
I'm going to hop off for one moment and refill my water glass, so I'll be right back.
Okay. Deborah, where are you from? And that's how she pronounced your name, Deborah?
Deborah, yeah.
Okay.
I'm half Turkish, half German, but I'm currently in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
In Michigan.
Yeah,
Okay.
graduated from Calvin University last year. So
Okay. Okay.
yeah.
Very good. Now, is there, I think when I looked up the center, is there a connection between the center and Calvin?
The Center for Public Justice.
Yes.
I know there's like no direct connection, but a lot of like partnerships. A lot of students from Calvin either intern for CPJ or have interned in the past.
Okay. Got it. Got it. And you're with, what group are you with in Michigan?
I'm currently, I graduated last year from Calvin University, so now I'm the communications associate for CPJ.
Ah, got it. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Very good. Sounds like you all are doing some good stuff. I wasn't really familiar, but you know, I looked it up when these folks contacted me, and looks like some really good things happening.
Yeah.
So I just came from a Jan term course that I'm teaching at McDaniel College on restorative justice. And we're about halfway through the course. It's 10 to 12 every day. And, you know, the technology is a challenge. It's gone great until today. And today, everything blew up. So,
Oh no. Were you using Zoom for your class?
no, we use Microsoft Teams. Yeah.
Yeah. No, there are always those days where technology just doesn't want to respond.
Yeah. Or I just didn't know what to do, which is probably more likely. Now, this morning there was a major presentation, right? Someone from the Casey Foundation?
Yes, yep, this morning we started with a presentation overview and then heard from Makai, which you caught the end of his interview. So yeah, it's been a great morning so far.
Good, good, good. Yeah, we used to, when I was at Juvenile Services, we used to consult with Casey quite a bit. They gave us a lot of support. It's probably a better way to put it. So, but with their support came their guidance, you know, particularly on alternatives to detention. That was, at least at that time, that was their major thing in the juvenile system. So, yeah.
Great. Okay. Deborah, I'm wondering if we should share. Who's Dr. Perryman? Hi, Dr. Perryman. Welcome back. So Deborah, why don't at just about 12:30 you start spotlighting?
Yasmin, right?
Yes.
Okay. I'll do that now, and then I'll just mute all the other participants, and then we can start.
Welcome back, everyone. I would like to introduce you to my amazing colleague, Miss Katie Thompson, who will be moderating our esteemed panel today. Katie Thompson is the program director and editor of Shared Justice, the Center for Public Justice's initiative for 20 and 30 somethings who are passionate about exploring the intersection of faith, justice, and politics. And I can personally say, in getting to know Katie over the last few months, she has a beautiful heart and spirit and is truly passionate about kingdom work. She is exemplar of the scripture, Micah chapter 6, verse 8. What does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Take it away, Katie.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. Thank you for that really kind introduction. And welcome back, everyone. I hope that you've been enjoying and learning from our conversation together this morning. And I am joined, as Yasmin mentioned, by a really wonderful panel of experts and leaders in this field who have come today to share with you about their experiences and their insights in working with young people. So we're really delighted to have them with us. I'm going to really briefly introduce them, but please refer to your bio sheet for their much more complete bios. So without further ado, let me just very briefly introduce first Miss Anna Hollis. Ms. Hollis is the Executive Director of Amachi Pittsburgh, a unique partnership of secular and faith-based organizations working together to support children and families impacted by the criminal justice system. We're also joined by Dr. Tracy Perryman, who is the Executive Director and co-founder of Center of Hope Family Services in Lucas County, Ohio, whose mission is to improve the life and outcomes of individuals and families living in urban settings. We're also joined by Ms. Dr. Denise Struthers, who's the National Director of Operations at Healing Communities USA, an organization which uses a framework for a distinct form of ministry for men and women returning from or at risk of incarceration, their families, and their larger community. Healing Communities challenges congregations to become stations of hope for those persons affected by the criminal justice system. Mr. Delmas Wood is the Program Director of Community Conferencing of Carroll County, located in Maryland, which is a restorative justice initiative offering alternative dispute resolution to youth, their families, and victims. Mr. Wood previously had a 39-year career in the Maryland Department of Juvenile Services, which included statewide responsibilities as Director of Community Justice and Acting Assistant Secretary. And lastly, we're joined by Ms. Seema Gajwani, who is the Special Counsel for Juvenile Justice Reform and Chief of the Restorative Justice Program Section at the DC Office of the Attorney General. So welcome to all of you. Thank you again so much for making time out of your full schedules to be with us this afternoon. So I'm going to begin with a question for each of you that I'd love for you just to briefly share with us. And that is, I'd love to know what has brought you to this conversation today and why is it one that you're looking forward to being a part of? So if I may, I'm going to go in the order that you're listed on my Zoom screen. So Delmas, would you mind kicking us off? Oh, Delmas, you're on mute. There we go.
Yeah, I'm just happy at this point to be able to share what my experience has been in juvenile justice and probation. Working with kids in the community was the heart of what we did in my part of the department. We also had facilities, correctional facilities for juveniles and placed kids in private programs. But I think this notion of looking at the system as, particularly as believers and striving for justice and trying to figure out what that looks like, to have to balance, justice for the community and safety for the community with kids, and trying to, treat each kid the way we would want our own child treated if he or she got involved with the system, is kind of what, I think is the heart of this.
Thank you, Delmas. Dr. Perryman, you're next on my screen.
Yes, so I think as a person of faith, there's always a certain element of providence to our steps and our moves. So I'll share that, I've been in the church just about all my life. And so the importance of service has always been instilled. And then we went on and founded a church in Toledo, Ohio, because we felt that many of the churches in our city did not address the social ills of society. Mind you, this was in the 1990s when, society was touting full employment and really saying that anybody who wants to be successful can. And that was not what we were seeing in our communities. And we felt like the church needed to kind of return to our thoughts and our ways of being in previous generations and decades, where we didn't just talk about what happened within the walls of the church, but become active and use that strength to move outside of the church and make a difference. So within 6 months of founding the church, we were met with 2 criminal justice issues for young Black men, one being a church member, one being a very immediate family member. One being a result of a child who was from a broken home and issues were not resolved. They were just kind of swept over. And the other being based upon race. And so really our first work, our passion was education, but really our first task was to intervene and work with the justice system to see what could be done about these 2 young African-American men. So that personal experience kind of led to us becoming more sensitive to it, made us attractive to other families who had been through similar issues. And then we took the opportunity to make that work and expand that work into our local justice system in Toledo. So in this next phase of my life, professionally and personally, my goal is to educate others who want to do this work on how to build a family engagement program that reduces negative juvenile justice outcomes, and how to advocate for it being sustained.
Thank you, Dr. Perryman. Anna, would you mind sharing with us next? Anna, you're on mute. Let's see.
Okay.
There we go.
All right, good. Okay, great. Here we go. What I said is what they said. I agree wholeheartedly with what they've shared so far. I approach this work from a strengths-based perspective. So I think about the promise and potential and, God-given purpose that, I believe every soul brings to this earth when they arrive. Amachi, the organization that I run, is the word itself is a Nigerian Igbo word, and it means who knows what God has brought us through this child. And to me, it speaks to the fact that we are all created in the image and likeness of God, to seek righteousness, justice, and peace, to be good to each other, to do right, and to defend the oppressed, sort of my summary of the word. So I personally believe that, I'm sorry?
I think that may have some feedback.
So I personally believe that we have a moral obligation to nurture and invest in the unfoldment of our youth. I think that when we fail our youth, we all stand to lose. And no matter how accomplished we are individually or as a nation, we really can't claim success when our children are failing. And I believe we are measured and judged by how we treat the least among us as people of faith. And what we've seen out of Machi is that when we make that investment, when we help to empower young people to discover what makes them amazing, and to help them establish a standard of excellence for themselves. We have a 92% success rate, with those very young people breaking the intergenerational cycle of incarceration. And they're not supposed to find themselves in any form of confinement, and yet the statistics, tout that all the time. The statistics talk about how children whose parents are incarcerated are more likely to go to prison themselves. And we just, we are opposed to that. We don't believe statistics, tell us what will happen. Statistics are a report of what has happened in the past and what will happen if we continue to repeat the same kinds of behaviors. But as people of faith, I think we are called to believe the report of the Lord, that all creation would reflect the glory and splendor of our Creator. So that is what drives me to do this work, is really believing in the power and potential of our youth.
Thank you, Anna. Dr. Struthers, what brings you to this conversation today?
Yeah, hi everyone. I've been in the church my entire life. I'm a PK as well. And one of the things that we are really teaching through Healing Communities is getting the congregation to get involved in the public square, to come outside those four walls and begin to work with community organizations. Number one, we already have the structure. We've already been given the commission to do so by God. And we can provide the mentorship. When I was listening to the young man, Makai, and when he was asked the question about the church, I cringed, because he couldn't really definitively say, yes, that the church is involved. And so I think that is my heart's desire is to, say to the church, look, you do church well inside those four walls, but that's not all that is needful. You got to come outside those walls. We have got to engage the community. We have to work with community organizations. We have to let go of our fear. We have to let go of our judgmentalism. And we have to engage. Even start with the families that's right there in your congregation. Because trust me, there is someone in your congregation that has been impacted by crime and the criminal justice system. Start there and begin to provide the unconditional love, the mentorship. Roll up your sleeve and get in the trenches with these kids and do whatever it takes to show them the unconditional love of God, because I believe that that's what they need. If they didn't get it in their home, okay, they didn't. Maybe we also need to work with the parents and showing them how to love their children and how to be better parents. Whatever it takes, we need to be right there. And the church's voice, Christians, we need to be right there alongside all of those who are working to end the terrible traumas that our youth are experiencing. And I believe that we have been mandated to do so.
Thank you, Dr. Struthers. And Seema, if you would share what brings you with us today.
Yes, thank you for having me. I should also say, like Anna, I'm moved by the comments of my panelists, so I'm so happy to be here with all of you. I work on restorative justice at the DC Office of the Attorney General, and I've been doing that for some time. And I had a conversation once with a prosecutor in DC who handled vehicular homicide cases for the US Attorney's Office. So cases in which somebody has been killed after an incident with a car. It's very serious matters. And we were talking about restorative justice, and he said to me, I'm Catholic. And he said, I've been doing this work, working on these types of cases for over 20 years. And in my experience, what I have found is the loved ones of the decedent, the family members who are hurt after somebody has been killed in a crime, he said, I see that there are patterns, and some people are able to move forward after such a devastating tragedy, and some people really aren't. And he said, what I've noticed is that people who have faith are able to move forward because they see this tragedy in the bigger picture. They have an abiding commitment to forgiveness and to grace. And as he was talking about that, it occurred to me that restorative justice, in many ways, is so linked up to the faith community. And when we talk about restorative justice, we talk about giving agency and voice and dignity to all people. We talk about instances of great grace and forgiveness and redemption. And these are the same words I hear when I speak to people who have really strong faith and are connected with their churches and their religious institutions. And so I was really thrilled when Katie and Yasmin approached me about being on this panel, because I know that all of you who are here today are connected by, as my panelists have mentioned, like a great deal of commitment to social justice and service, but also to faith. And I think that restorative justice sits in nicely in that space. And restorative justice is, in DC, where I work, it's ensconced in the justice system. We're at a prosecutor's office where we create an alternative to prosecution. But many restorative justice practitioners believe that restorative justice really should be held in the community, and it should be practiced by community. And there is no stronger community than the faith community. And so having a chance to be able to talk about our work to you all, I think is a great privilege and honor. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you, Seema. And thank you to each of our panelists for those really powerful opening remarks. Seema, I'm going to stay with you for our next question. And I'd love for you to share with us, we've learned this morning and gone through a presentation about juvenile probation and what the opportunities are for transformation. And from your experience, both in your current and prior roles, I'm wondering if you could share with us your perspective on why juvenile probation as currently structured is flawed, and then why there ought to be a focus on diversion as a priority.
Thank you, Katie. I have worked in the justice system for my entire career. So I am a lawyer. I graduated from law school, and my first job was to work in DC as a public defender at the Public Defender Service. And I was there for 6 or 7 years. I currently work at the prosecutor's office on the other side, but also in the justice system. And in those two contexts, I've represented young people and then worked with young people at the prosecutor's office who are going through the system. In between those two jobs, I worked in policy and spent a lot of time kind of learning about research and analysis about what the justice system can do. And what became clear in the kind of intellectual sense in the research is what I feel like I saw a lot in practice, and that is that kids who go through the justice system are hurt by it. That I would argue that most people, adults included, who go through the justice system are hurt by it, but I believe in particular young people, children, who penetrate through the juvenile justice system. It is an environment which is supposed to rehabilitate. It is supposed to correct for criminal behavior. But unfortunately, the focus has become so much on punishment and on sanction. And because there is such deep-rooted racial bias built into the system, with its roots in slavery and state violence and in our justice system, that what it ends up doing is really subjecting our children to criminalization, to stigma, right? Kids who go through the system see themselves differently. People around them, even in their families, in their communities, in their schools, see them differently. It subjects them to shame and isolation. And research shows that stigma, shame, and isolation are all drivers of violence. Those, as well as a lack of economic opportunity, which is a feature of our justice system as well, and exposure to violence. And when our justice system doesn't work, many of the youth who come through our system live in communities where violence has not been subdued. And so they are exposed to violence at home and at school. And so we have created this system that I think not only doesn't really help change behavior effectively, but I think it hurts. It makes it harder for young people to see themselves in the best light, to want to be better. And I think that that's for many, many reasons. I think the adversarial setup of it is a part of it. And unfortunately, I think that probation is a part of that system. I had many young people and adults who I represented as a public defender who I used to tell them, I used to say, your probation officer has all the power in the world over you, and you have to make that person happy. But that person is also set up in such a way to like wait for you to mess up and then report that to the judge. And then has a lot, and then it's your word against that person's word. And the dynamics of that environment are typically not ones where the young person feels like they are being treated with compassion and dignity and forgiveness and grace and the things that we want them to feel, because we want to model that for them. It's one where they feel like they're supervised and surveilled and are being waiting to be caught, which isn't to say there aren't some great probation officers, but I think institutionally and structurally, it's not a system that is actually going to help change behavior. I do believe restorative justice is a system that is better to do it. But frankly, I believe, as you suggest, Katie, that because the juvenile justice system, I think, causes harm to our young people, we're better off, even if we don't do restorative justice, diverting those kids from the system at the outset instead of having them come through the system.
Thank you, Seema. Anna, I'm going to turn to you for our next question. And as we discussed this morning, and as Seema has just mentioned, we know that there are racial and ethnic disparities embedded in our juvenile justice system. In Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, where Amachi-Pittsburgh is located, Black young adults are over 6 times more likely to be detained than their white counterparts. And you and your organization recently partnered with the Allegheny County Juvenile Probation Office and the Pittsburgh Foundation in a research steering committee to produce a report called The Case for Collective Impact, Addressing Racial and Ethnic Disparities in the Juvenile Justice System in Allegheny County. And there's so much to unpack from that report, but I'm wondering if you could discuss some of the key findings as it relates to juvenile probation in particular.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So, one of the things in our region is that there's so much concern and so much engagement around, promoting positive youth outcomes. And one of the things that I recognize, I've been doing this work for a long time, almost 20 years, and the need to focus on just to focus your efforts sort of results in, many organizations working in silos, although the issues that we're addressing are interconnected. And so many of the solutions that are most effective are also interconnected. And so, I wanted to figure out how we could understand what was happening throughout the community and to use that as a basis for building a collective impact model where we're all formally working together at various points along the continuum. In Amachi's, we're at the prevention end as early as possible, working with young people. And then, there are folks all along the continuum of the juvenile justice system. And so I think a couple of the most important findings here is that we really have to understand that this problem doesn't exist in isolation. It is a part of a much broader issue that, of systemic racism that's pervasive throughout society and throughout various systems. And these factors actually make Black and Brown youth more vulnerable to the school to prison pipeline. Understanding what those factors are, like what it means to be vulnerable to that system, could better inform our strategies as we're looking for solutions that not just produce positive youth outcomes, but that can really change our communities, that transform, that can really move the needle on the problems that we're trying to solve. Because, a huge issue here is that, every year we continue to release the same data that shows racial disparities. And even when there has been some degree of success with the total number of youth being referred to the system, we continue to see that the disparities persist. And so why is that? So really examining those factors, looking at disproportionate rates of poverty, trauma, incarceration, mental health issues, and what many people refer to as ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, play a huge role. Over policing in communities of color, disinvestment in communities of color, gross inequities in education. It's embarrassing. The fact that the quality of children's education in this day and age still depends on, the zip code is just unconscionable. I think it's sheer evil, to be honest with you. But on top of that, we see significantly disproportionate rates of school suspensions and expulsions. And I mean, we're talking about suspensions for every minor infraction under the sun, which is ridiculous. The behaviors that, Steve spoke to earlier are normal childish behaviors. Kids will get through it, some discipline and some love and correction, and wrapping your arms around them and providing them with, guidance is the better approach. But instead we're seeing, these harsh zero tolerance policies imposed on young people. And by the way, not a single one of us lives by zero tolerance. We make mistakes all the time, as we are seeing every day in the news, awful, heinous crimes, and we don't see the same kind of punishment. So I think that's really it's a difficult conversation, but it's one that needs to happen, and that's what we have pulled out of this work with this report. These inequities also extend to housing, transportation, healthcare, jobs, home ownership, accessing financing, opportunities for youth and their parents, everything that young people actually need to develop and be healthy and whole and find success in life. And so these disparities are even prominent in the philanthropic community, where Black-led organizations and faith-based organizations who are on the ground and right in the communities where the children live and are trying to their darndest to make a difference. And yet we have disproportionately fewer grants and financial resources to sustain this important work and to really scale the kinds of strategies that we know are effective, that the evidence shows are effective. So, we had a recent race and gender inequality report here in our region by the Gender Equity Commission. And this report documented that these disparities also affect Black men and women, but noted in particular that Pittsburgh is the worst place for Black women to live in just about every indicator of livability, quote unquote. And we are seeing that many of these issues exist across educational and income levels of Black women, and especially amongst Black girls. And guess what? These are the women who are raising the children that we're talking about. So what is our expectation for youth outcomes when you see women, their mothers, and even their fathers who are trying so hard to navigate these complex systems of oppression and raise their children so that they can be successful? So I think, what we have learned from this is that we have to really recognize and boldly call out that these inequities are rooted in a delusional system of white supremacy that literally imposes chokeholds on Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color. That is the root. And and being willing to confront that reality is the first step. We're looking at a very specific issue, juvenile probation, but it exists in a broader complex that we have to address. And so it's the challenge is really decriminalizing race itself, mental health issues, economic status, and so many of those factors that I talked about that make Black youth and brown youth vulnerable to juvenile justice. So one of the things that, when we're talking about decriminalizing, race and mental health issues and all of these factors, we point to within this report, an OJJDP report that talks about bias theory, which argues that minorities suffer harsher consequences, so that even when the behaviors are similar between Black youth and their white counterparts, at every point along the continuum in the justice system, Black youth receive harsher treatment. And then the other thing is really focusing in on the psychological elements that lead to racial disparities. So whether you consider it overt racism or implicit bias, decision makers are influenced by emotions that drive the perception of minority youth as threatening to middle-class standards and public safety. That was taken out of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention report in 2014. So those are the realities that our communities are confronting, and why, despite our best efforts, we continue to see the racial disparities persisting. So some of the key recommendations that we've pulled out, aside from confronting those realities and having those conversations, are addressing trauma-related psychological problems that youth are experiencing as a result of systemic racism, bias, and structural prejudice pervasive throughout systems. Recognizing that no kid is wired to automatically be disruptive or destructive. We're all wired, but under the wrong set of circumstances, any of us can be destructive. Any of us can act out of character. So when you see young people who are struggling to find their way, who are struggling to follow positive pathways, you really have to just step back and get to know that kid. You have to take an approach that's individualized. Yes, it's restorative practice, but it's also recognizing that this kid is unique and has a unique set of circumstances in his world. And what do we need to know and understand about how to repair what that young person is suffering from? So before they cause harm, they're suffering harm. And that's a key recognition that we make in the recommendations. Working with school districts to replace zero tolerance policies and punitive practices with restorative justice. One of the school districts in our region reduced referrals by 60% in 1 year's time by simply refusing to call law enforcement to do the work of social workers. So where are the social workers, and where are the reasonable human beings that know how to deal with kids and what they're experiencing? Enhancing training and resources for school districts, magistrates, law enforcement in particular, because that is the most vulnerable point. It's almost like once that young person has an interaction, that first interaction for law enforcement, that starts the cascade of negative events from there. So building those, creating opportunities to promote healthy relationship building between law enforcement and youth. And one of the things that we found here in Pittsburgh, it used to be a requirement that city police, because we have the biggest issue in urban communities, they used to be required to live in the city, which meant that they had more opportunity to actually know some of the folks that they were policing. But now almost all of our officers are outside of the community, and they're coming from communities where they literally have no interactions with people of color. And they're coming in to police these communities and bringing their biases with them. And another important thing was to establish a centralized data bank to utilize in monitoring disparities at all of the decision-making points along the continuum, so that we can begin to identify those key issue areas, those key problem areas, to build in a system of accountability, so we know here's who we need to be addressing, or here are the agencies that we need to be addressing, and to use that data also to help inform the strategies that we want to employ. Hope I didn't take too much time.
Not at all. Thank you so much. And I would really commend this report to our attendees. So we will make sure to drop that in the chat throughout our conversation. So thank you so much. Delmas, I'm going to shift to you. And you've had a long career, the majority of your career spent in the Maryland Department of Juvenile Services. You've shared that you began as a probation officer right out of college, and then went on to spend the rest of your career in later leadership positions. And now you're also leading a restorative justice program and nonprofit. So you've kind of experienced and had experiences in both of these spaces. I'm wondering if you could share, based on your experiences and observations over the years, a bit about what made government partnerships with faith-based organizations or congregations most effective, and what made that the case? Delmas, you're on mute.
All right, how's that? First, let me just affirm the really strong calls for justice that the prior two presenters made. And I think, we all need to listen very carefully to that and respond to it. My experience, of course, has been as one in the system for many years, working in the system. And, what we have, particularly in areas of higher crime, et cetera, we have kids that are involved in some very serious offenses, okay? And there's a whole history and a lot of injustice that's led to that. But when I came to Baltimore City to be in charge of our operations there, and that was around 2008, the prior 3 years of juvenile homicides, kids killed, was 28 each year. And most of those kids were killed by other kids. So we were talking about some very serious behavior and trying to treat those kids in a way that we would want our own kids treated, was the challenge for us, I think. When you would hope that the church faith-based groups would be in the heart of that, in the middle of that. But when I considered your question, once you advised me that you were going to ask something along that line, I have a hard time coming up with partnerships that we had with faith-based organizations. There weren't many, very few. And I think we need to look at that, because it would seem to be a place where it would be very valuable, obviously. So what happened with me? Now, I will say in Baltimore City, the churches, there were churches that were very heroic in terms of their ministry in Baltimore City. And we even had, we had some partnerships with the police there. And there was a particular, one of the hotter areas in Baltimore City is the Eastern District. And the Eastern District commander at that time was a kind of a hero of mine, actually, who not only was a police commander, but was a local pastor in that area. And he was held in, from what I could see, extremely high regard by that community. And he also was able to include pastors and Christian leaders in doing ride-alongs with police, to actually go out in the community with the police to be, I think, kind of a tempering effect on the police, but also to see opportunities where they could reach out. When I think of what the church or faith-based communities could be doing, the thing that comes to my mind when I retired from juvenile services, and that was around seven plus years ago, one of the things that I felt led to do was begin this community conferencing program, which is a restorative justice program, an alternative to the formal system. But the other thing that I felt led to do, I had gotten involved with a prison ministry called Kairos. And I don't know how many of you all are familiar with Kairos, but it's nationwide, even beyond the US. And it is, frankly, the most powerful ministry that I've ever been a part of. So we would go into maximum security prisons in Kairos. It'd be about 42 men that would go in and minister to about the same number of men on the inside. And some very powerful, life-changing things went on that Christ did in these men's lives during those weekends. I share that because that's an adult ministry, but I became aware that there's a juvenile component of Kairos called Torch. So to make a long story short, I was able to reach out to the Kairos Torch ministry, and we were able to approach a facility here in Maryland and offer to start a torch ministry there. So what we do at this facility, which is called the Silver Oak Academy, this is a residential facility for kids who have been placed there by the court system. It's a privately run facility. So we're actually in the minority nationally in terms of Kairos ministries. Most go into public facilities, public lockup facilities. Silver Oak is a more open facility, almost looks like a prep school when you come on the grounds, but they've got kids there with some serious charges. Most of the kids are from Baltimore City or from the DC area. What we do is offer to the youth there, and there, when we started, there was 60 to 70 kids there, and we would offer them the opportunity to come to a torch weekend. And we would hold the weekend right there at the Silver Oak Academy, and we would bring in about, let's say 25 adults to minister to 20 kids, 20 young men who had volunteered to be a part of this weekend. We would call it a retreat, okay? So the kids come apart from the regular program Friday night, all day Saturday and Sunday, and spend that time with us. We do the kind of stuff you do on youth retreats. You know, we sang, we shared, you know, the adults who would come in and we were a diverse group. We would share our own experiences and our own vulnerabilities. We would have small group discussions rooted in the Gospels and rooted in, you know, Christian teachings. And the themes of that weekend are very affirming, very positive. We start off talking about God. You are God's special creation. That's a theme. Another theme is the masks that we all wear, the adults and the kids alike. I just happened to have on my wall as I was thinking about this. This is a mask that, if you can make that out, this is a mask that I made that represents things in my life that I allow to be a mask to protect me from other people and from being vulnerable to other people. So we would model that and share some of the things that were masks for us. And then the kids get to share, and the kids are remarkably open in that. Some of them are. They don't even have to share their mask. But this is on Saturday morning, early in the weekend, and there's always some that are remarkably open already at that time. Others going to hang back a lot more. I won't go into too much more about that. There's a strong emphasis on forgiveness and forgiveness towards people who have hurt us. Okay, and because that's where these masks, we believe, come from. The mask of the tough guy, the big man on campus, the king of the hill, or these kinds of things. I think the most powerful thing about the torch ministry is that each one of those 20 kids at the end of the weekend is given the opportunity to have someone from the team, one of the adults, become their mentor for 6 months following the weekend. So we come back in for every week. For us, it was Wednesday evenings. Those 20 folks would come back in on Wednesday evenings, and then we would break off into separate tables with the youth that we were mentoring. The youth were given the opportunity to ask for who it was on the team they wanted to be their mentor, and do that for an hour every Wednesday for 6 months, or until that youth went home. This has been, we run this twice a year at the Silver Oak Academy until the pandemic hit. And I'd lift that up, I guess, as kind of an inspiration, because I feel like this is the kind of thing the church and Christians can be doing. And the wonderful thing about a torch is that it gives you a structure to know what to do. If you got some people that are willing. Now, not every Christian is going to be led to do this, but there are those that, and you can't really talk people into it. There are those, when you pitch it to them, those Christians, that as soon as they hear about this opportunity, their heart, like mine, their hearts beat a little faster, and they think, yeah, this is really what I want to do. And we find it a very fulfilling kind of thing as well. So the thing that I'll leave this for later, but just as the teaser, the question is, the mentoring works really wonderfully at the facility. The challenge is when the kids go home to their own communities, comes from the place that they were in, where they were before they came to the facility. That's a much stiffer challenge. And I think one that, again, I would love to have been able to, because these kids came from everywhere. I'd love for a kid going back to Baltimore to have a church that I could call there and say, hey, this kid's coming out. Those mentors that you've been trained in, can we hook this kid up with one of your mentors? I think I should stop at this.
Thank you, Delmas. Thank you, Scott, for sharing something in the chat as well. Dr. Struthers, I'd like to turn to you. And as we've talked about, there is room for the faith-based community and the church to be involved. And there are lots of ministries, we're going to hear from Dr. Perryman in a moment, that are already there. So we would love for you to speak about the biblical motivations for Christians being involved with juvenile probation reform, and why is that so important?
Okay, if I could just allow the theologian in me to just talk about how in the Old Testament, every generation wanted to bring to God the thing that they thought that God wanted. But we can read in Isaiah 58 that it was no different. They were fasting and they wanted to bring to God, their type of fast. And, God had to interrupt them and say, you think that what you're bringing to me is acceptable, but it's not. You guys are walking around, in this piety, but really you are hard-hearted, you're pointing fingers, you're arguing over things that at the end of the day are not important. You're not really taking responsibility. And then, God goes on to say that the fast that truly honors me is when you are helping, and it lists out 6 groups of people where you are feeding the poor, where you are helping the sick, the orphans, the widows, the foreigners, and those that are in prison. And then, the scripture says that if you do this, then your light will shine out from the darkness, and some of you will be able to rebuild deserted ruins of your cities, those systems that are broken down. If you would get involved in these things, then you have the opportunity to change it. And then in the New Testament, Jesus took it a step further, and he says the degree to which you reach out to these groups is to the degree that you are reaching out to me or not reaching out to me. So if the church wants to be aligned with God's heart and his purpose, then it is our responsibility to be thinking about children in prison and how that we can help them, really become thriving members of society. And I have seen this at work firsthand. I witnessed where a young man was about to be sentenced to about 5 years in juvenile detention. But when church families, there were about 4 or 5 church families that showed up in court to stand in support of that young man, that say, hey, we love him unconditionally. We do not want him to be defined by his mistakes. We are here to nurture him, to love him, and to help him to succeed in whatever way we can. When you have 4 and 5 mothers that are there to wrap their arm around a child, that makes a huge difference. And that spoke to that judge. And he was about to be sentenced to 5 or 6 years. The judge reduced the sentence to 6 months because he saw that the child had somewhere to go, that there were people that loved him, and he reduced it down to 6 months, plus gave him time served. So, we didn't want to see that child turned over to a system that was adversarial, that, for him to be raised and mentored by hard-hearted, men that he was going to encounter if he was incarcerated. And so having that understanding that we are called to wrap our arms around those who have been traumatized, who have been abused in society, who are being abused by this system. And I really think that the church has to take that responsibility and not just trying to keep offering to God what we think that he wants. We have good choirs, good praise teams, we can outpreach one another, but is that what is really needful? And I think that the young people, millennials, have spoken for several years now. They're saying, no, we don't want that kind of church. We don't want to be involved in that. We want to be involved in what is going on in society, because people are hurting, people are dying, and the church, God has given us the answers. He has given us the foundation to really step in. And like Delmas was saying, that when they do come out, they have somewhere to go. People who will give of their time, their resources to help this life become a thriving member in society. And, Jesus said, suffer not the children, don't withhold them, and that this is a very serious mandate from God. And Jesus warned us that it is better for someone to have a millstone tied around their neck and be drowned in the sea than to cause, these little ones to stumble. And we have just the opportunity here to really say so many. And I really liked what what Seema said, when she said that, that a lot of times we don't see the church operating in the grace and the forgiveness that is needed to step in. But, through Healing Communities, we are coming up against that. We're saying to churches, no, this is what God wants from us. He wants us to go and help and to step in. And when we do, I've seen it firsthand. It makes such a difference to those who are dispensing the punishment, and it definitely makes a difference in that child.
Thank you so much, Dr. Struthers. Dr. Perryman, we're going to turn to you. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about Center of Hope Family Services, which is really leading the way if we're thinking about exemplars in this juvenile probation transformation. Center of Hope Family Services is doing that. And specifically, Dr. Perryman, I want to ask you to share about the Family Navigators program, about what it is and how it works, and why you believe that serving the whole family is so important in this work.
Okay, thank you very much. I see how we're doing on time, so I'm going to be somewhat concise, but if there are follow-up questions, then we can address those accordingly. So Center of Hope Family Services was an outgrowth of Center of Hope Church, which, as I intimated earlier, was founded because we felt that churches needed to be more involved in serving the whole family, the whole community. And that throughout the Bible, we saw prophets and others who spoke to what was going on in their communities. They went to Pharaoh, they went to kings, they were involved in advocacy and the policies that were needed to better serve their people and the people that they represented. So once we adopted that way of being, it attracted a lot of people, because it was different and children and families could see how it made a difference and how they had to get by day to day. And what we found is that tithes and offering were not enough to sustain the type of demand that our community had. So we decided to found a separate 501c3 to address those specific social ills beyond just the theology of it and empowering and making people aware. But I like to say, so we have the vision of heaven, so then the nonprofit builds the stairway there. What does that look like? What we talk about on Sunday look like in actual action? So the Family Navigator program, I think it's important first to talk about the goals, because the goals drive why we do what we do. And so the overarching goal is we wanted to reduce minority contact with the justice system and out-of-home placements. As I talked about my personal feelings about the issue, my personal experiences with that specific issue. And so our way of doing that was by first connecting families to a support network, because oftentimes children become a part of the juvenile justice system. It can be because a family is already in crisis, or having a child or an immediate family member in the justice system will put your family in crisis if they're not already there. So first connecting families with a support network, then helping them understand the system and its policies, because oftentimes people are just dropped in this fishbowl. They get fragments of information. They are given terminology that, unless you have been trained in it and worked there, you would not understand. And then oftentimes those families are judged because they don't know what's going on. And then the next thing happens is it is put together with their motivation. And it's assumed that because you don't know what you're doing or you're not compliant because you don't want to. And then the next thing you know, those judgments and biases show up in what happens to the child. Also, as many of you have talked about, we have to connect families to relevant services. Oftentimes if the child is acting out, it's because some sort of need is not being met. And we figure out what those needs are. And then we also connect families with a network of service providers that actually have their best interests at heart and actually deliver on what it is they promise. And then we hold their hands and we're part of that process to make sure that the family gets the services that they need and they're treated with the dignity and respect that they deserve. And then once we've been able to stabilize, first of all, making parents feel supported and not like they are the defendant. When we make them feel like they're around people that have been through it so we can destigmatize the issues, we help them understand what's going on, connect them to relevant services, then they feel stabilized enough to speak for themselves. And we walk them through and we support them in that. And so all those things together have contributed to a 40% reduction among our kids in actually being pulled out of the home or detained. So we've seen a 40% reduction in detained youth that have come through our program. We use pastors as the navigators because just by a lot of times I tell the people that work for me, show me Jesus. You could show me Jesus better than you could tell me. So those who are not just ones that talk about Jesus, but are his hands and feet. And understand that this is not at 4:30, you don't just get off from work and it's over with. Having that, the ethics behind it. Understand that you do what you say you're gonna do. You don't lose client files and then make excuses. You don't promise what you can't deliver. Being honest, being consistent, being ethical. That's worked for us very well. So how that looks in a day is we're open in the court building, juvenile court, 8:30 to 4:30, Monday through Friday. And when families come in, they can walk in, they can request hearing support where we go to the hearings with them, listen for them, support them, sometimes have to talk to the court staff before and after. Rebuild bridges with court staff where there has been a disconnect and hold accountability on both sides. Connect them to community resources, as I talked about, and then of course, one-on-one and group support mentoring. So we have weekly parenting support classes that families can also attend as well. And hopefully empower families to become, caregivers to become family ambassadors. And they work in tandem with our clergy ambassador. And so the family has not only the more experienced clergy member who knows the court, knows what's going on, has that pastoral support, but also has a family member that has been exactly in their shoes. Though most of us from me on down have been touched by the justice system one way or the other, and it has been an immediate family member. But a lot of times it helps to have a family member who's been in Lucas County Juvenile Court, who's gone through the exact same process. So family engagement, why it's so critical. So these are the assumptions that compromise progress. And this is what I try to educate court staff on. First of all, that we can effectively address the needs of our youth without meaningfully including caregivers, as if they don't have a home or community to return to. Assuming that families are able to understand the court processes explained. Now I have a PhD, I think I have a fair level of intelligence, and they've had to tell me over and over and over again what things mean. And so I know if I can't hardly understand it without my hand being held, then it is unfair to expect families to just come in and in 15 minutes know what's about to happen. Another assumption, that families feel comfortable communicating with court staff without support. The fourth, that families and affected youth are able to work together to develop and implement action steps without support. So sometimes there's a disconnect between the child and the family, depending on how many times the child has been in contact with the juvenile justice system. And sometimes parents actually think that their children having that tough love is going to make them better. And so that's education that we have to do a lot of. Parents think sending them and telling the judge that they didn't go to school is the best thing for them. And we have to tell them, listen, the court is not here to raise your child. They're here to administer the law. They are not counselors. You don't want to say that. We need to figure that out in another venue. That families are in the position to comply with court requirements without additional support. So a big one, our public transportation system is very challenged. And so we've had to educate court staff on how they set courts and how would it be viewed by a parent. They said, you know what, actually that time won't work for me. Do we empower parents to really be able to speak up and talk about their barriers? No. So we have to assume that that's a barrier. The perception of authority is such that they're not going to share with the court directly. They need a support and they need a liaison. And then finally, that families feel comfortable asking for support. And so educating families on their rights, but also educating systems on how they can make the court more user friendly. And again, just building that empathy. How would you want to be treated if it was your child? The family member that, and I stopped giving his identity because I felt like that's his story to tell. And he's not here. So I don't give as much information as I used to. But I could say that every time I go behind my desk, I think, okay, so what if he was sitting here and he was across me? How would I want him to be treated? When he goes and gets all these services that they refer to him, how would I want him treated? So I carry that with me. And that empathy is something that we continue to try to push from the court side. And then families trying to get them to understand how this system really thinks and what it's set up to do. And using success stories of how people have transcended it to give them the same skills to move forward.
Thank you so much, Dr. Perryman, and I hope all of you feel as inspired and hopefully see ways that you could perhaps model something in your own community along the lines of what Dr. Perryman is doing. So we have about 12 minutes left, and I have one more set of questions for our panelists that we're gonna do a lightning round through. If you do have questions, please do drop them in the chat. And if we don't get to them, we will, as Yasmin mentioned earlier, keep them and do our best to get back to you with answers. So please do drop in questions. Seema, I'm gonna go back to you with a question. You launch the first restorative justice housed within a prosecutor's office in which restorative justice facilitators engage with prosecutors. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the type of culture shift that would be necessary to expand the use of diversion as opposed to a reliance on probation at a prosecutor's level. What would that take to begin that culture shift, and how might the faith community be involved?
Thank you, Katie, and thank you for all these great, inspiring words from all of you. I really appreciate it. I'm going to be quick because I know you want to do a lightning round. The cultural shift, I believe, that has to happen, not only for prosecutors, but for the whole system, in my mind, there are two things. Number one, there has to be a recognition that putting a young person through the system causes harm. So it's not costless. And we should think really hard before we put a young person in the system if it's worth the cost. Because people feel like it's no big deal. And that is misguided. And the results are seen in our children. And the other thing is that we must dramatically shrink our system. It should be the case that low-level offenders, young people who are very young, as in our office, are all diverted. They do not need to be in the system. The system will make them worse. So we need to shrink the system. What we've done is we've explored the concept, which I believe strongly in, and we're doing evaluations to study that only the serious violent offenses should even be going through the justice system. There are programs like the theories that have been beautifully voiced by Dr. Perryman, Dr. Struthers, and Anna, and Mr. Delmas have, all speak to the fact that there are other ways to deal with young people. Family, community, faith, treatment, programs, all of those things for most young people. For the kids who have committed the more serious violent crime, our belief is that restorative justice is a better vehicle to address it, because our justice system focuses on punishment, but restorative justice focuses on accountability. I was listening to Dr. Perryman and she used the word accountability and empathy. That's restorative justice. She was talking about accountability between court staff and parents, right? We're held accountable. Our kids are only going to learn from their mistakes if they speak to the person they've hurt. They hear from them how badly they were hurt. They build empathy, and then they co-create with those people a plan for them to make it right to the extent possible. And so they are giving themselves a path to redemption, to be the person who they want to be, and the people around them who are not only the person who's been hurt, but their community, their supporters, their family, who are critically important, are part of that pathway to redemption for them. Because if it's other people who come in and try and fix it and then we send them home, we know the research shows that that doesn't work. And so the answer to the second part of your question, what role can the faith community play in that? I think it is to do restorative justice. You are the community. The faith community should be doing the work of restorative justice, bringing together people who've been harmed with the kids who harmed, helping them come into circle, see their humanity, speak to each other, and then create a path forward for them to be the people that they want to be.
Thank you, Seema. Delmas, a question back to what you mentioned earlier about the importance of mentoring, but also the seriousness that comes with it and the commitment that is necessary. Can you share a little bit about, in your experience, where you've seen mentoring be most effective and done in a way that it is sustainable, particularly for young people before they enter the system to begin with?
Yeah, sure. You know, my experience with mentoring, we were always looking for mentors for the kids that we were working with, right? It makes sense if a young person changes his life and his or her life in a positive way, you can always find a positive adult that's involved in there that, you know, had a big part in that. So of course, that's what you'd love to be able to put into each one of these kids' lives if it's not there, or to put another positive person in their life. I think we've got to be, my experience was, and the research that I saw at the time that, you know, would be going back a few years around mentoring with our kids, is it can't be a light dose of mentoring. It can't be, it's really got to be a life on a life intensively. It's got to be, it's got to last for a while. You don't bring somebody into a kid's life for a month and think that that's going to turn, you know, it's got to be at least a year. It's got to be seeing that kid several times a month, probably weekly, for an intensive amount of time. And that's hard to find people that are willing to do that and able to do that. I think it's hard to find mentors for any young person. And you talk about kids who have seen as youth offenders, it's really difficult to find people that are comfortable doing that. In my experience, the programs that we found that did a good job with that paid their mentors. Okay, so it might not have been a lot, but they got paid. In the Baltimore area, we had a program for quite a few years. I think it still operates, called the Choice Program, affiliated with University of Maryland at Baltimore County, UMBC. And they would take kids who had just come out of college, and it was almost like a missionary thing. They would say to these kids, we're going to work you to death. We're going to put you in high crime areas, working with kids that need a lot of attention, they called them advocates. And you're going to see these kids like every day, and you're going to do it for just a year. This is not a career. You're going to do it for a year, and then you're going to go on to the rest of your life. That was a pretty powerful model, and you know, intervening in these kids' lives. And we had some other programs, not that many, but we had some others that hired people, usually people from the communities that these kids lived in, and paid them to come alongside these kids in a really, you know, constructive way. And that did make a lot of difference. So those would be the concrete things I would lift up.
Thank you, Delmas. Dr. Struthers, given your experience with healing communities and particularly stations of hope, as you've mentioned, what role do you think that the church can play in juvenile probation reform specifically? And as has been mentioned, and you've echoed even, why must the whole family be considered in that?
Yeah, one of the things, I think that Delmas really said it. I mean, if the child is going to go back to an environment that's toxic, the chances of recidivism is great. So the church can work with the family. We had one woman in our church that went to prison for about 3 years. Well, she had about 3 or 4 kids. When she came back, they were very angry and had suffered because of her decision, but because the congregation got involved in ministering to her in terms of what she needed to do to repair her relationships with her children, and even the children in, offering grace and love and forgiveness to her. And so, it took about a good year, but now they're doing well, they're thriving. And so if we leave the family out, then what good is that? I mean, everybody has to be involved. And sometimes parents do not know how they're angry. They don't know how to deal. And so what they do is they put them out or they stop dealing with them. And that just does not help the situation. I remember my sister got angry with my nephew and she put him out the house. And I could not believe that she did that, but that is something that is in our culture. And I was like, girl, if you don't go back and get that boy and bring him back, and you have to deal with your child. If you don't know, then someone can help you. And so, as Dr. Tracy was saying, we have to be living epistles. We have to not only believe the word, but we have to become doers of the word. And love is long suffering. Love is patient, love is kind. And so these are the things that we know, we've heard it our lives, but it is now time for us to begin to walk in that and demonstrate the power of God, where he can take our few fish and our loaves and begin to multiply it. Just step out there and begin to do what we have been instructed to do. You don't even have to make it up. It's already clear. The instructions are clear, and we have to embrace, or rather get the family involved. We cannot let them sit on the sidelines. We have to work with social workers. We cannot leave it on them. We can't leave it on the probation officers. We can't leave it on the court system. Come on, guys. We know that it is important that we are involved in every aspect of life, and not just even when it's unlovely, even when it stinks and it reeks. We're still called to go in and bring the beauty of God's fragrance in the midst of that situation, and be willing to do whatever it takes. Go the long haul. Be loving, be kind, be healthy ourselves, and be transparent, but never giving up. I mean, really being living epistles and showing them who God is through our ministry.
Amen. Thank you, Dr. Struthers. My last two questions, one for Dr. Perryman and one for Anna, are very practical, and I hope that for those in our room today, as we begin to consider next steps, that you'll find these responses helpful and informative. Dr. Perryman, I want to talk about Lucas County, Ohio, which has taken several steps towards reforming the juvenile probation system. And part of that includes partnering with your organization and with the Family Navigators program that we've discussed. You even mentioned having an office in the court itself. I wonder for our audience if you could share a little bit about how this relationship with the county began, what the very early days of formation looked like that would lead to such growth and partnership down the road. Dr. Perryman, you're on. There you go.
All right, so for one thing, we had already been working with the court indirectly through helping them reduce their child support numbers. We were helping individuals with child support cases seek employment, participate in parental support groups. And as a result of our mentoring and helping them with employment, they were paying their child support on time, getting the adjustments they needed, and we're not being incarcerated. And our target population was young men ages 18 to 24, which can be a challenge to work with. So I think that was one thing that put us on their radar. And I think to speak to churches and to other community agencies, you need to know what you bring to the table. So we knew that the community, we were the key to credibility. for the court. You can't get people to sign up for anything or participate until they count you as credible. And we knew the pillars on which our credibility stood. For one thing, many of us were leaders and activists in our community already. So we already had a community presence. Faith-based leadership. So faith churches are always filling in the gaps of what bureaucracy will not or cannot do. We had the practical experience by having loved ones who have been through the system and helping walk people through the system before we ever signed up for a family navigator program. But I also had the research-based experience, which are things that are translatable and transferable now, tools that I can share with people. And again, like I said, the personal and the practical experience of doing the work. So those are the pillars of credibility, which the court understood that we had, and we understood that we had. Now, with that, I would say here are some things that we work with the court on. I kind of developed a diagram for balancing that credibility and accountability on both sides. So the first thing is knowing what you bring to the table exclusively, knowing what the court brings to the table exclusively, and then having to find areas as to where we need to work together. If you don't know that going in as a community-based partner, then it's easy to get swallowed up, chewed up, and spit out. So you have to be able to stand up, you be respectful, but you do need to know how to stand up for yourself. And so we were, over time, we had to work through because the way the court saw it was everything was supposed to be enmeshed. And as a separate organization, we had to remind them that we have our own policies and procedures, and a nonprofit and a government organization, there are ways that we share and there are things that we don't share. So we understood, we're respectful. The court administers the grants. They were the leaders at the time in policy reform and development and implementation. We weren't in that space yet. We also understood that they had parameters in terms of data collection, analysis, and reporting. But we also said that on our side, we have the expertise in actually overseeing this particular program and implementing it, because we carried the keys to credibility, from the research all the way to the being in the community and having the credibility with the end user. But we also knew that if they were leaders in policy reform and development, that we needed to be good at collecting data ourselves, and we need to have our own data to strengthen their efforts and to help them get their needs met. So we built an infrastructure for that. Now, this is where we said we need to work together on coordination and communication, because they have initiatives they need to meet and we have parameters we need to meet. Data sharing, we understood, but as we share data, we need you to share where your initiatives and your trends are going so that we can collect data that helps you do what you need to do. Analyzing policy and program alignment with priorities, youth, and family needs. So yes, you may have your policy needs, but does this work for the families? Because if it doesn't work for the families, ultimately you're going to lose your credibility. And if you lose your credibility, then you're going to have a hard time meeting those goals from your funders as well. And we have continuously advocated that sustainability should be a shared responsibility. And a lot of times as churches, we feel obligated to be everything to everybody. And that is not the case. If systems have resources they need and they're getting their goals met, and the reality is they save money every time a child is not incarcerated, then they need to chip in on whatever these interventions are. Because if you're not careful, those savings will translate to everywhere but the program that's actually making the difference. So you have to be prepared to do that. So we did a social return on investment. And we now know for every dollar that the community invests in Center Hope, that community saves $6. And so we can also work through with communities how to calculate that, so that when someone says we don't have the resources, we can go back and point to, but see, look at what you're saving by investing in this group. We used to talk about value, but everybody doesn't care that one type of washing detergent may be more valuable, you may use less. You have to also translate that down to savings. So those are some of the things that we have worked through to be able to work in partnership and cooperation with our local court system. I can tell you that they are probably one of the easiest to work with, But in anything, like I call it, it was a shotgun marriage. Like there was a grant, and then like in 6 weeks, we were supposed to be up and running. So anytime you have a shotgun marriage, you have to establish those shared goals and those boundaries. And that's just a part of the work. It doesn't matter who you work with. And so we are very happy to say that we've successfully figured out how to do that, and we continue to work together. And here it is, the 6th year.
That's amazing. Thank you, Dr. Perryman. So encouraging. Okay, my last question is for Anna. And I want to reference again the report that we discussed earlier. And in that report, you note that as a direct service organization, which many in this room are representing direct service organizations, you recognize that in order to address many of the systemic issues that we've talked about today, you need to supplement a direct service program model with a policy and advocacy agenda. And so you've done a lot of work to convene local stakeholders. We've mentioned some philanthropic partners, nonprofits, law enforcement, government agencies. Can you share with this group more about the work to convene such a group like that, and how others in a perhaps similar direct service model might begin the work of trying to convene such a group?
Yeah, sure. You know, I happen to be a part of the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency, which is a state agency. I think every state, there's a federal mandate that states monitor and address racial and ethnic disparities. So there should be some governing body in every state. And I happen to be a part of ours here locally, and just learned so much about, you know, the power players, who's involved. And I think that experience for me really opened up new doors of opportunities. And it also gave me the relationship that I could leverage to mobilize folks at the local level. And that's what I did. I mean, I went to one of our foundation partners and, you know, just sort of outlined the vision for how we could move the needle. There are several foundations locally who have established, you know, racial and social justice as a part of their agendas. And so I sort of just had to show the link between those two. And I pursued it. And I literally, Steve Bishop is on one of those subcommittees with me. And so I invited him and other members of the commission to Pittsburgh to talk to our stakeholders here. And honestly, just throwing out that name, the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency, and getting our local foundation partner, the Pittsburgh Foundation, to be a part of it along with JPO, I think that really gave us credibility and encouraged folks to come out and get involved. And so that was really where we started, is just really trying to understand who has some influence and power and ability to open up these doors of opportunities. And I think we're at that unique, you know, pivotal moment in time, actually, as a nation. And, you know, in terms of, you know, when I think about change, and I mean, I spoke to this a little bit earlier, I sort of zoom out and look a little bit more at the macro level. And so I think about, like, in addition to so many of the wonderful strategies that folks have shared today at the grassroots level, I think the challenge for the faith-based community is really to be willing to do the dirty work, is dirty, messy work that needs to be done. And I'm going to say that, you know, especially for the evangelical community, because of its political power and influence and its national and even global reach. You know, so in keeping with the collective impact mindset and that approach, you know, that we're employing here in Pittsburgh, I think something like, you know, an ecumenical national alliance with a clear and aggressive policy agenda would be powerful to address these issues. And for those folks who believe in the trickle down, this to me is I think a really key strategy that could work. You know, one of the things that I think needs to happen is that the church needs to elevate the priority level of racial equity and justice nationally and globally. You know, I mean, we've heard loud and clear the initiatives that are important to the church on the national scale, but I'd say that, you know, at the macro level, I think it's, the church has been pretty silent on racial and justice. I mean, micro level, folks are on the ground, like I said, during the dirty work, but that national narrative, needs some work. Leading the paradigm shift that needs to happen, redirecting resources, driving that action to redirect resources towards strengths-based, people-focused people. These are human beings who are suffering, honestly, just because of a stupid mistake that's landed them in a system, and then it escalates and goes from there. It's crazy. But just towards those strategies that we know work and that are focused on empowerment and families and thriving communities. Changing the narrative. What is our value system as people of faith? Where does racial justice fall in the pursuit of righteousness, justice, and peace? Examining the spending on punishment versus prevention. And, Dr. Perryman just spoke to that a little bit, and strengths-based investment in youth. So juvenile detention here in Pennsylvania in a secure facility can cost about $200,000 a year for one kid. Are we serious? So we can educate and provide effective social services at a fraction of that cost. We know this, everybody knows it. Why don't we do it? I think, recognizing that Black and Brown youth and their families are not problems that need to be solved. They do experience problems that we need to help empower them with tools and support and resources that they need to overcome. I think all people have the inborn capacity to solve their own problems. And so the question for us is, how do we facilitate that? Just sort of going back to the economic piece, I think we always have to be willing to follow the money. I think it's so important when we're talking about disrupting long-standing complex systems. We have to understand who is incentivized to perpetuate these systems, who's profiting from systems of oppression, because this is our resistance. This is how we identify our resistance to change, the change that we want to see, at the systemic level. And so those are undertakings. I know those are big ideas, but the opportunity is there. And I think this is our moment with what we've seen play out on the global stage around, police brutality and racial injustice, and people's eyes are now open to the things that we've been crying and screaming about for years. This is our moment. And so I think that whomever has those connections and, the ability and ties to those, at that national level, I think we really have to challenge, some of these strategies that I mentioned today be adopted.
Thank you so much, Anna. I know we could keep talking about this for a long time, but would everyone please just join me in an applause or an emoji of thanks to our wonderful panel. Thank you so much to each of you for taking the time. So we're now going to split into breakout rooms. We're going to have 3 sessions. We're going to be able to talk for about 25 minutes. And I would encourage you, I know it's been a long day on Zoom, but this is so important because, as Stephanie mentioned at the beginning, we want to learn, and many of you are in attendance, and we'll have expertise and insights to share with us as well. So please do stick with us for those breakout sessions, which we're going to facilitate. And then we will come back together. Again, please come back for that last 5-10 minutes in which Stephanie is going to offer some closing remarks and give a sense of what some next steps are for this group. So hang tight one moment, and Deborah is going to put us into some breakout rooms.
Sorry, I'm almost there. Just need to edit a few things.
No problem. Thank you to those commenting in the chat. It's encouraging to hear from you.
Everyone should get the invitation on their screen. So if you can just join the breakout rooms, that would be great.
We identified so many entry points into the work that needs to be done, and so many connections to be made between what churches and faith-based organizations know, what they're already doing, and connecting it to this tremendous opportunity for transformation when it comes to juvenile probation reform. So I just want to recap our day for a minute. In addition to learning more than maybe many of us knew when we started about this opportunity for transformation with juvenile probation reform, from Steve, Opal, and Makai, we also learned from our really inspiring panelists and learned about the opportunities that are clear for Christians, for a juvenile justice system that works to engage families as central, for a system that sees every child as created and loved by God, worthy of dignity and respect. There is a tremendous opportunity for the church and for faith-based organizations, not only to provide the mentors and the people who take the time to listen and walk alongside young people who need diversion and opportunity, but to get to work in embodying the kind of fast that is acceptable to our Lord. Investing our lives in the transformation of juvenile probation from the way it is today. Think about the vision that Dr. Perryman talked about and the opportunity for that kind of transformation in our own communities. So here's the next steps from our time together. We're going to make sure that you end up with lots of resources from today that we built together. And that includes the discussion that we just had in the breakout rooms where we didn't have time to share what we were learning with one another. You're also going to receive a survey tomorrow with some follow-up questions from the event. And if you would take just a few more minutes of your time to help us build on this learning process from today by contributing your responses, that will really help the work going forward. And we are confident that today's conversation is just the beginning of a partnership. In my breakout session, we talked about the importance of having these examples and having resources that would help clearly identify opportunities for churches and faith-based organizations. What would require someone to be a lawyer in a situation like that with particular legal skills, or what would require other skills to be helpful, as well as needing the resources to do the difficult but necessary work of advocacy for change. And so we'll be in touch regarding these types of tools and resources, as well as the information about the commitments that were made today, including future convenings of this group, plus others who also need to be part of this conversation to build lasting change together. So thank you again to our amazing presenters. Thank you to Yasmin for her wonderful facilitation of our time, to Deborah for her wonderful tech support, and to each of you for the gift of your time and your wonderful questions and insights today. I don't think I'm the only one that is going away hungry for more. I did ask my friend Gary Frost to close our time in prayer, so he's going to do that for us. So Gary, thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Let me just read a passage of scripture, and I promise not to preach, but it'll be a foundation from which I pray. Jesus continued going around to all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and every sickness. When he saw the crowds, he felt compassion for them because they were distressed and dejected, like sheep without a shepherd. But he said to his disciples, the harvest is abundant, but the workers are few. Therefore, pray to the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his harvest. Eternal God and Father of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, thank you for the wonderful privilege. Thank you for the wealth of information, God, just the insights. Obviously, these that have presented have done their homework, God. They've given us vital data and even challenge. Thank you for their lives. I pray that you'll continue to guide them and increase their knowledge so that they can share it and give them many more platform opportunities to share. And I pray, God, as they share, people will have ears to hear what you're saying. We realize, however, God, that we need the empowerment of your Holy Spirit. Father, we realize that it's not by might nor by power, but by your Spirit. Lord, we've learned the hard way that your Spirit doesn't travel through government systems or even religious systems. Your Holy Spirit moves to the hearts of individuals. Father, there's a deficit of caring. There's an increase in knowledge and a deficit of compassion. And people in various ways are communicating their opinions and doing nothing. I pray, God, that you would compel us and that you would challenge us to and send us out, God. Make us uncomfortable until we're willing to touch the lives of these young people, these children. Father, many are fatherless and motherless, and many are directionless. And God, I just pray that you give us the compassion. Lord, we don't need a lot of resource or whatever to show love and kindness to a child who's looking for acceptance, significance, and direction. So Father, pour out your Spirit and use all of these techniques and strategies, but we know all of it is activated only by the power of your Spirit. So bless this ministry, this work of the Center for Public Policy and Stephanie and all that she's doing, all of her team, and allow them to be effective, dear God, in making a difference in our world until Christ returns. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen.
All right. Thank you all again so much, and go in peace. We'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Someone asked me to put my contact information in the chat and I'm so slow. Oh, he's still here. Okay, Solomon, I just sent it to you.
You guys are awesome.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
This was awesome.
Oh, I'm so glad.
I agree. Yeah, it was really wonderful. Thank you for
So
doing
the next one's next week, right?
Give us at least 2 weeks, please.
God bless you guys. Have a good one.
Bye.
Thank you so
God
much
bless.
for being here.
See you
And
guys.
thank
Thank you. It's good to
Thank
see
you
you.
so much.
Good to see you all. Thanks, Katie. Thanks,
Thank
Stephanie.
you.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Yay.
Praise
Good
God.
job, guys.
It went really smoothly. I'm so thankful.
Deborah, you're like the master of Zoom.
No, the breakout rooms were like that was a little confusing, but how was it? How was it in the breakout rooms?
Perfect. No problem.
Yeah, it works perfect.
Great.
Yeah, Deborah. All
Yes.
to you and to God, I am flabbergasted that we had a perfect technology day. So
I'm so glad that like everything worked out.
Me
The
too.
audio worked, shared, screen. I'm very relieved.
yep. I just texted Mean to join us again.
Okay.
Stephanie, if you have things to do, please